Hello! I messed up with the with the mic for a second there. Hey everybody, how we doing? Doing good today? Excited? I know I am. Let's see. So, yesterday's Halloween stream was great, but man was it long. Oh boy, 10 hours. I was like, oh, course party. That's a 10-hour game. We can do that. It did not end up being a 10-hour game. Once we hit that 10-hour mark, I was like, okay, I'm exhausted. I'm doing homework. Oh, good. Good on you, John Kick. Being a responsible student. Now, let's see. What do we got here? Am I missing anything? No. Just yesterday's stream. Oh boy, it was fun, but man, was I tired. I ended up just conking out right afterwards. I was like, okay, let the dog out, get some more water, and then right on the bed. Now, the upside was I got to have a huge detox day, which I definitely needed after how crazy things have been. These streams have been my only reprieve lately, so thanks a lot, guys, for helping make this feel like a hobby and not more work. As we can see here, our Drake Blood Knight friend has something new to give us. Let us see. Well, it's a set, naturally. I think this is because we killed the one in Archdragon Peak. Again, to kind of get us the point that sometimes the ways of which we acquire equipment is completely arbitrary. Sometimes it's like, it drops from an enemy, but that enemy still has it afterwards. Or, we can kill this enemy, but it won't give us our, the armor until we kill him after this arbitrary point in his, quest, usually at the very end. All of it has to do with, of course, not lore, but gameplay. This is something that you must always keep in mind, especially for people who would try to use, the fact that a character gives us X item or whatever at certain points and be like, no, this is completely significant. Yes, them possessing that item, quote-unquote, is significant, but us acquiring that item may not be. It may just be a quest reward. Well, last time before that, we did Archdragon Peak, I think? Yeah, I think we covered Archdragon Peak. Yeah? Yeah. My goldfish memory is like, 2 days ago, what happened 2 days ago? Yeah. But, yeah. So we went over to the mountaintop, the summit, saw that there was an entire temple that was dedicated to archdragons, well, specifically one archdragon who happened to turn into a mountain, as well as the firstborn of Gwyn's. Now, Gwyn's firstborn was exiled. Well, I guess we shouldn't say necessarily exiled. He's more like he was expelled from the pantheon of the gods. He was stripped of his godhood. Along with that, he ended up leaving and found looking for an archdragon. So that way they could start a whole draconification system going, as we see in this game. Now, apparently, he didn't think to check Ash Lake hard enough down below, because he would have found an archdragon there ready to help make some new friends. But nope. Instead, we see that he travels far and wide. Dark Souls 2 has him in places him in Ferosa at one point, so he becomes like a popular god there. Eventually, hey, I'm early for once. Hey, James. Ended up, as we see, then the firstborn ends up finding the archdragon over where Lothric would one day stand. Now, it's over in the remote regions where Lothric was, but it was very useful when Lothric suddenly had a problem where all these wyverns from Dark Souls 2 end up here with other parts of Drang Lake, including the First Flame, and ends up becoming this whole big fiasco for them to deal with. So the ancient Lothric citizens essentially go to the firstborn and go, hey, could you like help us with this dragon problem? Seems like you have a you're friends with dragons, and you're someone who once slew dragons, so we could like use some advice. And Firstborn, being a friend to all, even when it's not necessarily the smartest thing to do, he didn't inherit his father's political acumen. You know, just doesn't run in the family, I guess. Passed over him. Honestly, probably went to Gwendolyn. Anyway, the point being, of course, is that the Firstborn obliged, and this is where we see the Dragon Slayer armor, an old Dragon Slayer who had been fighting the wyverns that were plaguing the land at the time. Now, after this, we see how Lothric ended up becoming part of the ended up visiting the Archdragon Peak more regularly in order to try to become wyverns. The idea being is that the temple would not accept them fully unless they stayed there, but they're like, okay, you know, we want to maintain this good relationship, so we'll let you have this little front building here. You'll get a shortcut straight in, so you don't even have to go through the whole checkpoint and all that. We know your identity when you wear the armor. And it's okay, so we let you in, and then you'll be able to go do the hoobity-wah with like all the old wyverns that we've got here that are friendly. They're not like the wyverns you had to hunt. And then you can become wyverns, and then this resulted in basically the Lothric culture not only developing around the Firstborn, but also around dragon riding. Now, this is a example we see, these ruins which exist at the heart of Lothric, that are clearly the castle and the entire city was built around, telling us that this forest garden was where Lothric religion started. They were just humble barbarians, living out in the rural countryside, when suddenly they were beset by wyverns and had to gather together under the rule of a king, rise up, and take back their homeland, their native land. And then, as a result of this, because of the first flame being here, and the dragon slaying culture that developed, we see this temple. Now, this temple, as we can see, was the original quote-unquote Firelink Shrine, with this Lord vessel. This was where it all began. Coming together, the dragon slaying elements with the Archdragon Peak elements with the Anor Londo Link the Fire elements. And it all came together with the Dark Souls 2, what Dark Souls 2 culture brought over with Drangleic was the Way of Blue and the general faith from there. Now, as we see, there were statues of Frampt up top, this allowing to give us an idea of Lothric culture embodying this concept of the angels, servants of gods, in order to have a medium between man and the divine. This medium, both in the literal and the other sense, sets up the entire notion that, okay, Lothric wants to become and reach this point of being angels themselves. This is where we see statues of the king dressed as with angel wings and sort of having this globe in his hand sometimes to represent dominion over the world. Again, the point being is that the Lothric royalty and thereby the Lothric state must, the Lothric nation must be loyal to the gods. They must be their servants. And of course, this is all being done because Lothric is now the place where the fire, linking the fire must be done. They are the ones who are taking charge of it. They're the ones who had stewardship and access to the area, though of course we cannot use this in-game. There is a cut area which had very probably might have been able to give us an in-game reference point for where Lothric would have accessed it underneath them somewhere, much like what we see in Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 1. However, as far as the game is concerned, we essentially just have to kind of infer it. Now, much like, from the past games. And of course, the whole stagnation and time-wadi that's happening around Lothric is always the good indication, especially when you got the fire linking happening here. Anyway, moving right along, we can see how this temple was basically built. Again, we see how all the Twinkling Titanite and Titanite scales. Again, these were things that we realize all come from Archdragon Peak and are a result of the relationship that Lothric has with Archdragon Peak. So how does the First Flame move around so much, from Lordran to Drangleic to Lothric? Because the First Flame is weakening, there is a... okay, well, I guess we should say this in order. In Dark Souls 1, it's established the idea that the First Flame, the fire, light fire, specifically its light, is sort of embodies time. And so the power, by manipulating light, you can manipulate time. Now, when you manipulate time, I should say, you are by extension, manipulating space, because time and space are inexorably linked. Like, you cannot separate the two, right? Like, time only exists within the space with which time is progressing, right? Like, you cannot, like, separate the two. So this is why we see both dark and light magic, dark having dominion over space, as we see it's weightier, it's heavier, right, etc. The idea being is that both light and dark magic we see can overlap in some cases, as Dark Souls 2, for example, gives us, like, say, Tranquil Walk of Peace from Dark Souls 1, which was, again, a Ulasilian, well, I should say, it was a miracle dealing with the gods or what have you, and it was heavily connected to Ulasil, and of course, it being a peaceful light sorcery nation under the gods' purview. And then you have in Dark Souls 2, the same miracle is now a hex, a dark art. And the point being, of course, is that both can replicate the other's effects through their own methods, because, again, time and space are linked in that regard. Now, all of that is sort of the preface to saying that when the first flame is going down, this is where we see the whole time is quote-unquote convoluted. Now, I'm sure the localization meant it on the secondary meaning of it being, like, overlapped and da-da-da, but obviously everyone thinks that convoluted means, oh, it's just so complicated. That's why my theory makes no sense, Smile. Like, it's like, there doesn't have to be any logical consistency if time is convoluted, but what Solaire is actually saying is that the flow of time is stagnant. Like a river, it sort of hits like a barrier, and then boop, that river starts sort of like creating like a little pond area because all that water flow is just stacking up in that one spot at the end. So that's what we're basically seeing. So random parts of time, say, again, I used an example in a past stream, you come to the Undead Burg on day 1, Solaire comes to the Undead Burg on day 10, but you meet Solaire on day 1. Well, that's impossible, because causality requires that Solaire come to the Undead Burg first before you can meet him. Well, because of the first flame weakening, and therefore the flow of time beginning to stagnate, because again, weaker fire, weaker light, weaker effect on time, the entire action of causality can start sort of overlapping. So sometimes you'll have two of the same place on different days overlapping that specific time period, specifically time, sort of come over, and then you can thus sort of meet on another day. Think of it like think of it when you like drop a ribbon or a rope or something. It just sort of falls to the ground, and it'll randomly sort of that rope. It's one singular line, but that rope will kind of twist and curl and start hitting other pieces of the other rope at different points along it. So that's sort of how it happens. You just briefly, these two pieces on the line sort of curl over and overlap for a second. Now, because of this, you would think, okay, well, that sort of messes up time for everywhere. Well, no. Solaire, of course, is very specific in Dark Souls 1, telling us that it's only affecting Lordran. So, and again, Abyssal Archive goes into more detail about this, but the short version is that Lordran is basically in a time bubble. It's only its area is having this weird, wonky time shenanigans. Now, this, of course, is to tell us, well, the first flame is in Lordran, and therefore it's the thing that's weakening when this seems to have all started, so therefore it is responsible. The same thing happens now in Dark Souls 2, which is, again, the New World, or as Dark Souls 3 clarifies, in the far north of where Lothric is, and the old world of Dark Souls 1 setting is somewhere in the south, because, again, they both have access to the far east about equal measures in terms of influence. So, again, we know that they're somewhere along the vertical axis. Anyway, the point is, saying all this, is to make the point that the events of Dark Souls 1 and 2 establish essentially, okay, the first flame being that the time is getting weird and stuff, and where different times can meet in the same space. Well, what happens when different spaces meet at the same time, right? So now, instead of it being not just say, okay, Solaire in Undead Burg at this, like, Solaire on that balcony when you first see him on Undead Burg on day 10 is meeting with us on that balcony on day 1. Now we have a case of what happens if that Undead Burg on day 1 intersects with Drangleic Castle on day 1. Or, so, well, I guess Drangleic Castle didn't exist. Let's do, I don't know, Undead Crypt from Dark Souls 2 on day 1, right? Like, sort of this idea that two different lands overlapping now at the same time. Now you would think, well, isn't that what happens in Dark Souls 3? Yes, but Dark Souls 2 is the one that introduced it, by telling us how, essentially, different pieces of Lordran ended up in Drangleic, or what would become known as Drangleic eventually. And the idea being is that all these different lands scattering around are how cultures got rebuilt, because certain people that were in these lands got stranded, and that resulted in all the whole twisting of memory and everything that caused essentially the Dark Souls 2 setting to be so different from the Dark Souls 1 setting, because they didn't have their gods with them to help keep things standardized across the generations. Man has a fickle memory indeed. Things eventually drift and go away, and you might say, well, there's undead. Well, undead eventually hollow, and that seems to be the the point that Dark Souls 2 is trying to make, again, is part of its larger thematic messaging. But the general result of this is that, okay, we're seeing some of this in Dark Souls 2, and Dark Souls 3 just cranks it up a notch by saying, okay, the First Flame and other pieces of Lordran plus Drangleic now have moved over to this new place called Lothric, which happens to sit in between the two other settings, hence why we get a bridging point where now these two settings are reconnecting, and things have started sort of developing around there, where all the forgotten stuff in Dark Souls 2 is being re-remembered, old lands are being fallen, new lands are rising up as a result, and all yada yada yada. So sorry, James, that was a really, really, really long question. I hope that explained it for you. But yeah, that's the idea there, is that the result of quote-unquote time is convoluted is causing space to also being quote-unquote convoluted. It's all stagnant. It's all stagnating around and becoming this giant mottled hot pot of a mess. Now, this is places which didn't involved in this stagnation, as we learn, are like places like Undead Settlement, which was of course just a city built after Lothric, a town built for undead after Lothric started shipping out its undead after it became an organized kingdom. It's like, okay, what do we do with our dead? We'll just dump them outside. Or Archdragon Peak, which again seems to have already been here when in the remote mountains when Lothric needed help from the Drangleic pieces that came. So it's not the flame moving, but the lands. Yes, the flame is moving with the lands, if that makes sense, right? Because it's like, okay, the time bubble is in Lordran. I guess I should clarify, the same time bubble is later in Drangleic, right? We see the exact same timey-wimey shenanigans, summoning across worlds, blah, 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 right? Because that's the same idea. The First Flame, the land the First Flame is in, the kiln and all that, gets moved along with everything else. So it's like, okay, pieces of Lordran, the kiln of the First Flame, parts of Izalith, parts of Anor Londo, parts of the Duke's Archives, parts of Nito's domain, the Undead Crypt in this case, and probably also catacombs and stuff like that, given stuff in the gutter. And, you know, these lands that we were familiar with in Dark Souls 1 got moved along with the First Flame, because again, First Flame power is weakening, so random parts start stagnating in terms of space as well as time, and that results in them basically teleporting to a whole nother far-flung portion of the world. And in Dark Souls 3, where it essentially establishes, oh, that happens again, and the stagnation's getting worse as time goes on, and the First Flame continues to, like, the weakness of the First Flame just continues to be left that way. Because again, no matter how much we sort of keep on trying to pump souls into this fire linking business, we can't get fire to go back to how it was. It's basically just being perpetually dying. How do you distinguish between game mechanics and game lore? You can see an entire post I do on this where, it's called Artistic License, and I basically talk about, this, so there's a lot of, like, obviously nuanced examples and things that should be clarified and stuff, but generally what happens is, I look at the gameplay, and I see how characters react and do stuff, and I just think about if this was a real place. For example, is it canon that every time, if my little, like, toothpick of a knife, stabs at this giant-ass demon repeatedly in the toe. I just keep stabbing that toe until the HP hits 0. Is that canon? Well, obviously no, because the idea that you just stab something in the toe and it'll die within 5 minutes is probably not that realistic given the circumstances. However, the concept of I attack this thing, I stab it, that hurts its health, and eventually it will die, well, that makes sense, right? Because again, gameplay, game mechanics, try to express things either in our world or familiar to the setting of which they exist in. So again, we understand the concept of HP, it's all numbers and stuff to represent the idea of I get stabbed, I get hurt, I lose the faculties which allow me to operate my body until I, quote-unquote, expire. Or say, for example, a Or say, for example, when you, like, have stuff with, like, say, online or whatever, and you, say, meet characters who, of course, obviously they have, like, unique or something armor that that obviously there's only, like, one of that armor in the world or something like that, right? Or different things like that. Like, you go into, again, I recommend the post, just, again, go to the search bar at lokisouls.com, go to the search tab, you can just type in artistic license, and you'll find it that way, or you can just check under my commentaries in general, under the guide page. The point is that we just have to kind of take it on a case-by-case basis of, okay, how does the game do this? How do characters react, or the lore seems to indicate this happens? And then sort of, okay, what can we then infer and sort of kind of lay the groundwork so we know what limitations are we working inside? Another example of this is respawning at bonfires. Respawning at bonfires isn't canon. That's a game mechanic. The idea of, say, you becoming a petrified statue to a basilisk, and then you just respawn at the bonfire, and it's like, okay, that's fine. No, that doesn't work. And again, Dark Souls 2 reinforced that doesn't work, because, well, we see what happens when people, including undead, become petrified by basilisks. They just become stone statues until someone breaks the curse and frees them. But that's not how, but again, that doesn't make for very interesting gameplay to have a permadeath. So they're like, okay, no, we'll just pretend that petrification doesn't happen. That's what happens here, of course, in, say, Dark Souls 3. Again, Dark Souls 3 is just like, you get petrified by a basilisk, okay, we'll just pretend that didn't happen. You're back, you know, blah, 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 blah. I knew this would be interesting when you started with discussing time and space. Thanks for explaining. Well, you asked, I answered. Anyway, speaking of time and space, we can see how we sort of have inadvertently walked between worlds, as we were in a, well, now we're in the eclipse, but the idea is that we were in a sort of quote-unquote daytime Lothric, right over there, you can kind of see over there, and then we were just walking, yada hooda yada yada, and suddenly, oh, that's pitch black, that's pitch black, that's pitch black, oh. Something is wrong here. Now, we've seen stuff like this before where you kind of smoothly transition between dimensions without even realizing. For example, Things Betwixt in Dark Souls 2, you kind of are just, you're going through the interspace of the aforementioned time bubble. Again, that's the idea of Things Betwixt. It is as the Firekeeper in that game explains it in the opening cinematic, the holy wall. It's sort of this idea that, okay, you have to go through this kind of interspace, this little gap between the two-dimensional spaces of the outside world, which has normal flowing time, and the time bubble of Drangleic in Dark Souls 2, which now has this stagnant time, because again, that's where the first flame is, and the first flame is dying, so therefore time in that space is weakening. Now, what are we transitioning to? Well, we saw that there was a illusory wall here that we got rid of, and the illusory wall, of course, seems to be the reason that Olceros was here, because, hey, he's got a baby, he wants to link the fire, so he wants to go to Firelink Shrine. And as we see, behind this illusory wall is the Cemetery of Ash we were at before, except now, it's pitch black. Now, for me to have to say that this is clearly not the Cemetery of Ash we're familiar with, and yet it clearly is the Cemetery of Ash we're familiar with, is an understatement. We also get, as our first item to define this area, a Shriving Stone. Now recall, we usually get this from Corvians. The idea being is that this stone seems to somehow be derived as the Corvians work towards especially the storytellers, work to transform those involved. You have this idea of a husk. What does the localization call it? Also known as a stark stone. Okay, they call it stark stone. The word used, of course, is like a husk, like say when an insect or a snake or something sheds its skin and it leaves behind that little, that little like thin skin layer, whatever it's called. That's called that's the type of idea of a husk. Hence why it looks like that. It looks almost like a shed insect skin, but in terms of a rock almost, right? Like the Titanite almost shed itself and that layer is gone. So it has this empty hollow, of course, inside of it, with which the idea is we can similarly empty out and remove powers and things like that by having, I guess, that stone absorb the Titanite power with which we already infused into our weapon or whatever. Anyway, as we can also see, of course, there is actually Corvians right there. There's that poisonous rot that we talked about in the past. I should probably... Whoop. I should probably get my HUD going. There we go. What is space and time in the Dark Souls universe? Light is time, basically. Like, light itself is time. And then dark seems to have dominion over space. I wouldn't necessarily say it is space. Space seems to sort of almost exist separately, in that obviously there's negative space here, right? But actual space, the foundations of this universe is rock. Again, in the beginning, there was just the rock. It was, the trees were rock, the dragons, the animals were rock, and the rock was rock. Everything was this monotonous gray. Now, fun fact, gray in Japanese is literally ash color. So you can kind of see how the thematic wording is used here, where we're kind of, in the beginning everything was gray, and now we're seeing how at the end everything is ash gray once again, with literal ash this time. Anyway, let us deal with these guys. Wow! Not enough, huh? I'll be honest, I'm actually kind of impressed. I thought my pyromancy would just melt them like everything else. Are they telling really cool stories of the Ashen One to their grave, or are they mocking us? So, I'll talk about the Corvians once we're dealing with this guy dead. So, the storytellers tell stories about the Corvians who basically, well, I should say the Corvians. They tell stories to those who have been, outcasts, undesirable, forsaken, detested, etc. That's sort of the meaning of the quote-unquote forlorn. You'll see the same kanji being reused for, of course, Alva, Seeker of the Spurned, and of course in Elden Ring they use it for the quote-unquote the Omen children, right? So, same thing. Is the idea, of course, is that, you know, they are rejected by society. They are societal rejects for one reason or another, right? And the idea is like, oh, we have nothing, we have no place in this world, and so then these Corvian storytellers come flying in, and they're like, hey, do you want to hear the good word of Priscilla? And they have this legend about how, hey, undesirables like Priscilla will be guided to this like Messiah, this like holy land of the painting world. It'll be like sort of this paradise where you will have your own place to belong, and you'll be no longer will you be like, you know, persecuted or rejected or ignored or blah 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 blah, and you'll be free. Now the Corvians, by nature of this, can be found basically anywhere, theoretically. They're like the Black Knights. Black Knights, they're just wandering the world, so you can find them anywhere in the world, because, well, they be wandering. That's somewhere in the world. Same thing with the Corvians, right? They're out there, the storytellers are out there looking to convert, and those that they convert become these Corvians we see here. They still have a lot of their humanoid traits, but they're clearly becoming crow-like, and we see when we get close and all that how the transformation exacerbates. So we're basically, we always, you have to always remember, our character will always happen to be at places when the developers say want it. We will always be there when the Corvians are about to transform more radically. We'll always be facing Sullivan right before the stagnation makes him transform and gather wings conveniently mid-boss battle, which we will instantly use. We will always show up to somebody right after they've been killed, and there's a guy standing over the corpse who just killed them. Darn, if only we were here 5 minutes faster. But it doesn't matter how many we go there, because just that's the nature of the game, right? The developers try to set up a scene, and we just have to kind of understand that that's the quote-unquote pacing of the narrative that they're setting. So Priscilla is Corvian Jesus, basically, right? Her, because the descriptions in Dark Souls 3 mirror, in terms of terminology, particularly in the Japanese version, the description of the peculiar doll from Dark Souls 1. And if you remember, it mentioned how there was this... I forget the exact wording that it called, but like a being or an abomination or something like that who has no place in the world to belong or something to that effect. And the idea is that, oh, she was of it slowly, I can't remember what the localization had, but the Japanese was, of course, like to be guided or led to a cold world of a painting. And the point is, of course, is that much like how that happened to Priscilla, Dark Souls 3 is showing how Ariandel, or again, previously Ariamis, is becoming that same to others, right? So it isn't just Priscilla and those who are already imprisoned in the painting, it's new people who are also being guided and led in to create a thriving society, a sort of refuge for those who don't have one otherwise. Now, how does this connect to where we were once buried? Now, as we see here, this is not us, because we are here. This person had a very bad day, however, because it looks like he got disturbed by the Corvians, who decided that they were going to stand over while they were listening to their storyteller tell the heretical mythologies of the painting world, right? So who's this guy? Well, this is someone who's received the Ashen Estus ring. This ring is much like the one we acquired before in the... Where is it? Oh, there we go. It's much like the one we acquired before with the Firekeeper mausoleum, where, okay, so a bunch of Firekeepers have died, a bunch of their souls have been used in order to create Estus flasks. A bunch of those flasks have been shattered and broken. What do you do with the pieces? Okay, we'll put them together and we'll make our own little green ring here. That'll essentially have that same effect of the Estus, because again, much like the Estus shards we give to Andre, these are Estus. These shards of the Firekeeper's soul turned to glass absorb the heat of the bonfire, the Estus, and sort of retain that power. And we put it into our flasks, fashion it with Andre. He goes hammer, hammer, and adds it to make ourselves have a bigger flask with essentially more retention to the heat, right? Because it's got that Estus already in it, so that heat's already sort of imbued there, and that heat will now keep the Estus that we have in our flask hotter for longer, or what have you. So there's less decay on that, and therefore we get quote unquote stronger Estus, right? And then we see, or I should say, more swigs of our flask, right? That's how that's represented mechanically. And then we see the same thing where when we throw bone shards into the Firelink Shrine bonfire, we create a bigger flame, because again, bonfires are, generally speaking, made using the bones of undead. So you throw more of those in there, and then those undead bones, presumably with some traces of the humanity, are thrown into the bonfire, and thereby making that flame stronger, and that's the heat we get. So the base heat of the bonfire is now going up. And sort of, again, all of it sort of interplaying to create this general concept of, okay, we can have more swigs of our flask with more potent healing. Now, what we see here, though, is that something happened to this ring where it got cool. Because again, light goes to life and death, light and dark, heat and cold. Eventually, for every aspect of disparity introduced by fire, there is another that arises as a consequence of the first. And so, as we see here, this ring, you get cold. It seems to be, of course, steeped in the cold ash that cools it down, and it causes the interaction between the heat and the cold ash causes it to crystallize. We see something similar, of course, with our own flask here, where we see a similar crystallization occurring as a result of the strong power and souls from the Estus. There we go. Right. I am blind. Causes a crystallization effect to occur when the ash meets the bottle in the soul. So we're seeing something similar here now with this cold shard, and much like how we see with the Ashen Estus flask, this causes. Ooh. Where are you? Oh, right, it's at the top. This causes it to, instead of healing you on a physical level, it causes healing instead on a mental level. Again, Andre tells us how our two Estus flasks reflect help restore our life and our will. Again, the idea of being will is, of course, the core to what makes us alive with our soul. Again, like a soul is just a source of power until it gains a will, and that will causes it to operate and act. It exists in this space autonomously, or to some varying degree of autonomy, and this results in it being quote-unquote alive. Now, as a result of this, we see how, of course, the idea being is, okay, this restores your mental energies versus your physical energies, and of course, this results in, okay, the more will we have, the more focus we can retain before we run out and can't use skills or magical abilities or things like that. Basically, this is a very convoluted way, actual convoluted way, for Miyazaki to get a willpower stat into his RPG. He's like, wait, we have like an endurance stat, we have like a constitution stat, we have like a strength stat, a dexterity stat, but we don't have a willpower stat. Okay, I guess we'll turn attunement into constitution, right? So, yeah. I mean, to willpower, so, yeah. Anyway, so the idea is that this was a undead who was seemingly buried with a ring of that. Now, this ring has an interesting history. As it was originally not buried here, but brought to the Queen of Lothric, who, as we established last stream, was, when we went off to face, Aldrich, was, Guinevere. Now, so Guinevere marries Osseros, because, again, when she left with the gods, and then she married Flann, which was, again, something Dark Souls 1 established, but then Dark Souls 3 establishes something new. She became a wife and mother. Now, this is Rosaria and the Dancer, who turn out to be her kids. We see this from their souls, who both produce Guinevere's miracles as a result, because, again, they descend from her, so they have some of her power, and they have experience with her miracles, and yada, yada, yada. It all fits with the cosmology of the universe. Now, it all fits with the universal mechanics. Now, the last bit here is where the localization kind of messed up, because it says, oh, she raising several heavenly children. This is not referring to her being a wife and a mother here. It's talking about how later she ended up having these quote-unquote heavenly children. Now, I talked about it before, how the Japanese here means like noble, and it can also denote sacrality and stuff. So in my translation, I say, to kind of like split the difference, I say exalted. I don't really have a trouble with this localizations decision, though, except in another item, which should have apply the same rule, which doesn't. But the point is, of course, is that, so she became a wife and mother, had with Rosaria and Dancer with Flann, and then she had more kids. But why mention this separately from her other kids? Well, that's because, as we see here, she became Osseros's wife, again, and she was in Irithyll for a time after Flann seems to have left the picture. You can speculate what you will what exactly happened to him. And then, where are we? Where is it? Oh, no, it should be under General. We don't have it, so I don't have the Divine Blessing on me right now. We can go over there and grab it. The point being, of course, is that she becomes the Queen of Lothric after marrying Osseros, and she continues doing what she's doing, right? Like, people are still gonna regard her as a goddess of bounty and fertility. Again, good harvest, so she's a nature goddess. And she's gonna still give out her divine blessings and all that. And as we see here, the Queen of Lothric, she will have her cold divine blessings, those that go cold and are now deal with mental energies, and give those to Unkindled. And she'll place them in the graves here. That's one of our burial gifts, is one of these hidden blessings. The idea being, of course, it's hidden over in this cemetery. Now, the point of her heavenly children, of course, is that she goes and marries Osseros and starts having various kids. Gertrude, Lothric, Lorien, and then Ocelot. Yeah, we might want to use these items in the future, too, so... Oh, did I already... No, yeah, here it is. There we go. Yes. And then, of course, as we know, as we established before, because Guinevere was previously, before she left with the other gods and married Flann, she was married to Sif, who, of course, went cuckoo, which contributed heavily to her decision to just kind of up and leave with everyone else, ends up seeing that her husband suddenly comes to her and being like, hey, honey, I want another kid, in the form of a giant white dragon who's kind of been crazy lately. And she, after giving birth to that kid, she's like, all right, I'm out. And just leaves. She wants nothing to do with this family. Hey, Loki. Hey, Eric. I'm in the busy explaining. I got a lot of long questions from you guys today. I'm so sorry. We're really kind of sticking around these first 30 minutes, huh? Are there different planets in Dark Souls? We know that there are heavenly bodies, but they're very likely not actual planets. They're very likely something else. The sun represents the first flame, and the moon, by extension, represents, again, not the moonlight, the moon itself represents the primordial rock. And again, this goes back to what we see in thematically, of course, when we go to Archdragon Peak, because there's both archdragons and, of course, the firstborn there, we see that the skybox depicts both the sun and the moon on the different ends of the sky. Now, obviously, we know how this happens in real life, but again, that is how Miyazaki's trying to set the tone thematically for this land. It is the land of the sunlight and rock. Now, again, obviously, the moon is, of course, a giant ball of rock. The sun is, of course, a giant ball of fire. Both of them, however, seem to not be necessarily literal bodies existing in this empty vacuum we call the sky. They're very likely something else. Abyssal Archive will go into more detail on that. Lamau, she'll be stuck there for a year. Yeah. It doesn't look like alternate universe Ashen One was enjoying that story. They don't look so healthy anymore. Yeah, so this is an alternate universe, though. So we going back to the original point being made. This seems to just be someone else who is buried here. Oh, right. With the ring. And then we ended up taking their grave after this point. Because that's something we're going to see a lot here. This is the Untended Graves we're familiar with, but it's not in the same time space as the one that we see, of course, when we go to Firelink Shrine in the regular hub. It's most of what we see are events which happened in the past. Sure, these Corvians probably came here. Well, the Corvian storyteller probably came here in the past and is waking up people in their graves and having those who want to convert, or even the Gravekeepers who are possibly here, and giving them a sort of hope in order to leave. We'll see this even more. I talked back in the first stream how we see fading souls along with deserted corpse souls, because it makes sense that over time, a lot of these deserted corpse souls eventually turn into fading souls, because again, they're no longer eating or killing or doing things which would normally have you gather up souls into your body. So they just end up kind of decaying like a flame until they fade away. Now, in terms of what we acquired in the Cemetery of Ash, it was mostly fading souls. But as we'll see here, instead of enemies like the Gravekeeper hollows here dropping fading souls or anything like that, they'll now drop deserted corpse souls. Again, we are in the past. We are seeing a period now where these souls are stronger, and therefore they are worth more, of course. The Corvians probably came here at one point. The storyteller, and then converted these people, and apparently disturbed this guy who got the ring that the Queen of Lothric decided she saw the ring, because clearly whoever had this ring or saw it transform was like, holy hell, what's this? I don't know what to do. Queen, you're apparently in charge of this because you're also placing hidden blessings here, which again makes sense because she's Guinevere, so of course the gods are going to want to have a god watching over the fire linking system in some capacity. So it's like, hey, Gwendolyn sends Guinevere to Oseros because Oseros wants to have a child with the daughter of Gwyn, so that way he can produce a fire linker. Again, he thinks, hey, she can give me some of those Gwyn genes, and therefore I can guarantee my family produces a fire linker. That didn't work out as he planned, so he ends up deciding, no, my problem is that I'm a man, so if I become a Seath-like dragon, and then I will be able to have her genes mixed with mine, and we'll produce a super fire linker, and everything will work out, and obviously he's crazy. Loki, if an Age of Dark came to pass, what do you think it would be like? I don't want to know, because obviously if light is time, and therefore an absence of light would mean there is no time, everything essentially exists with this giant, time is irrelevant, like causality is absolutely irrelevant, I don't want to see it. We see a peak of this here with Untended Graves, because as you may notice, it's pitch black. There is no light. Well, besides the miraculously lighting that Miyazaki has this game do in order to help lead you around, right? It's like, ooh, what's causing that space to be so bright here? Nothing! It just catches your attention so you'll go that way. Again, gameplay versus lore. Sometimes the developers do stuff because it suits their gameplay purposes. What are the other stuff we got? Meanwhile, Yuka... Eric's got a great one. Meanwhile, Yuka, oh my god, we're leaving her to try to find the bathroom for an entire year. Oh my god. So for those that don't know, in the Corpse Party stream, one of the characters, the quote-unquote 14-year-old who looks like she's, and acts like she's freaking 6, her character ended up just being, I want to go to the bathroom and I refuse to do it in the fucking buckets and literal holes in the goddamn school everywhere. At least she has some very trustworthy person taking care of her. Lol, yeah, we left her with the psycho. Oh my god. Oh sorry, Yuka. No more Corpse Party stream till next year. I left her on red. She'll be stuck there for a year. Okay. Guinevere, look at this cool ring I found. Isn't it cool? Well, it was more like my queen. This ring. Oh, I guess you're talking about Ulceros with his dragon scale ring, huh? Oh, actually, yeah, that makes sense. But no, with the other ring, the Cold Estus, Ashen Estus ring, we essentially get the idea that Guinevere has no future. She's like, okay, this ring, we'll just put it in we'll just give it to one of the Ashen Estus, the undead there, much like my hidden blessings, and we'll call it a day. But this, of course, gives us the idea. They're not used to the whole ash causes crystallization, causes an ununique thing, but, again, as I pointed out, it causes crystallization. Now, we see this in other contexts, of course. Obviously, Dark Souls 1 establishes this a lot with crystals. Again, read Abyssal Archive for more detail. No, it's here, right? There we go. But we see this, of course, in other contexts, like, again, Refined Gem, not really. Here we go, Crystal Gem. Of course, you get Titanite, a rock. You mix it with some of the soul power of that white flame that the crystal sages are producing and using, and they use it to create these magic crystal gems. You also see it, of course, to some extent here with this other magic gem, with the simple gem. Fire gem, not really, but again, chaos gem. The idea being that this was produced when the Titanite interacted with the chaos flame when it first ravaged the land of Izalith, when, you know, Witch of Izalith made her oopsie, and ended up creating a flame of chaos when she was trying to create a first flame of her own. Again, same thing, of course, with Dark Gem. Again, mixed with the dark power of the humanity, mixes with the Titanite rock, and sometimes that power is so strong it just causes, ends up producing crystallization with their interaction and all that. Especially considering that Titanite gems, of course, are products of the Nameless Blacksmith god, who, of course, is a god of Anor Londo, and therefore is using sunlight power, and then, of course, obviously, Dark really loves that opposite affinity of it to eat. Point is, so keep that crystallization factor in mind going forward. Now, you may also notice our not Oscar character is not dead here. Again, this is the past before he is here, but it isn't that far in the past. As we see, there's a corpse over here, dead, facing the direction of where our guy would inevitably collapse here with our Ashen Estus flask later on. And what do we find? The soul of a heartbroken knight. Interesting. Now, again, I talked about the idea that Untended Graves is portraying mostly stuff in the past. Now, you can imagine a case where the knight that we looted here died, became a died here. Oh! We'll talk about you later. Wait your turn. Wait your turn. There we go. You can imagine a scenario where the knight died, was killed by the Gravekeepers, because again, we loot his soul here, then back in the real world, he hollows, walks a little bit longer, then gets killed by the Gravekeepers again, and gets put down for good, where we loot the flask finally. So again, we get this idea of how the events of the past are being experienced now in our quote-unquote future. Now, of course, we see these Gravekeepers from the Cathedral of the Deep. Now, is this just the case that Miyazaki wanted to have a stronger Gravekeeper enemy in the cemetery level compared to the tutorial? And so he said, let's just copy-paste this enemy here, it'll be fine. Maybe. Or maybe the idea is these actually were Gravekeepers working for Lothric, and some of them got sent, much like Oceros' personal guard, over to the cathedral to help out. Again, I could go either way, really, but however you interpret that, the point is, of course, it makes sense that you could have these Gravekeepers, their clothes worn out from all the blood and mucilage they deal with, and plus using like their swords in order to spark fires to blow. That makes sense, because as we established last time, the Gravekeepers in Cemetery of Ash were using flame, whether it be fire bombs or fire arrows, in order to deal with some of the bodies here, because again, they produce the pus, and so their job is to keep the pus down. That's part of tending to the dead. Can the living, those who don't have the Dark Soul, survive in the Age of Dark, since life is linked with souls and that with fire? Yes, because, not every soul, at least in the beginning, right? I guess, the quote-unquote beginning in a world without time. Again, this is where I don't like talking about the Age of Dark too much, because again, it's the ending that will never be canon, and we will never see, because that would require Miyazaki and company to essentially get the ending of the game they want. And there would be no future Dark Souls narrative strike. So they're always going to do a Link the Fire or something related ending. But the point is, of course, is that in a world where the Age of Dark finally happens, the First Flame is allowed to die. There's still going to be stuff connected to the First Flame. We, of course, see this with the Lords of Cinders. We'll talk about that in the future. But, of course, the idea being is that all the people who have souls connected to the First Flame or no, are still going to be around. Like we see with the Chaos Demons, their Chaos Flame, their Mother Flame is dead, but they, with their souls that have Chaos power in it, still exist and is being passed on to next generations, etc., etc. The point, of course, being is that it's not all going to just, disappear and die. However, with the nature of the Dark to eat life and devour souls, who knows how long that's going to last. You can't theoretically imagine a future where it's only the Dark Soul, every other soul will be eaten. But again, that depends on how are the humans, who will be the rulers of this new age, going to handle those who are no longer, those who weren't so fortunate as to have the winning soul in the lottery. They lost the soul lottery, so, I suppose the best way to think of it is, like, well, maybe they're gonna be nice and, like, just, do what Anor Londo gods did, and just, be like, you're gonna be, like, second-class citizens. And if you don't want to get eaten, you'll serve us and do what we want. Again, it's really hard to say, because, again, this is the ending where man is in control, and we are its king, so it's sort of left to your interpretation if that's a good or if that's better or worse, though as Dark Souls 3 tells us, it is inevitable. Well, yeah, this entire area is proof. There's the dogs. Again, we established the idea that the dogs are being used to deal with not just hollows, of course, but also the pus. We're going to see more dogs over here. Now, if I recall correctly, there's just the one dog over at Firelink Shrine. I guess because we killed all the dogs now. It's like, oops. Oh. Oh, boy. I hope I have the stamina for this. There we go, I do. Beautiful. Titanite chunk, not important. We're only like 15 minutes in and my mind has already been blown multiple times. This will be a good stream. I'm so glad that, yeah, that's the reaction. Let's go in. As we see here, this guy's got some arrows. Now, again, we saw these arrows were used to indicate crossbow bolts from the Cathedral of the Deep. So again, presumably same idea here. These dogs have been shot by the Gravekeepers with their crossbows and stuff. Because, hey, eventually, as we see here, these dogs which are eating the flesh of hollows and becoming hollow themselves, if you guys want more information on that, I'll be glad to talk about. But just moving, just for the sake of brevity for the moment, the point being is that, okay, they're obviously going to possibly get corrupted by the pus or whatever. And so it's like, okay, we gotta put down Old Yeller. Again, another example of this, of course, being the past. We obviously killed one crystal lizard, giant crystal lizard before. Now we'll see here that there are two more that are in this same area. Again, the point being is that crystal lizards devour souls, which obviously you can find tons of souls buried here in graveyards, so it's not just rock and titanite they end up consuming. They end up consuming the soul itself, and that raw soul power causes them to, well, become these hulking monstrosities. As we established in the Archdragon Peak stream, when this happens there, we see the same effect, but because the souls they're absorbing are the souls of the Archdragon, who just emanates it out for just, being an Archdragon and draconification and all that, instead of them turning into those monstrosities, they just get a few titanite scales, but end up becoming those giant rock lizards that end up breathing fire and be more dragon-like instead. So the idea being is, of course, these are just normal human souls, so yeah, none of that's happening here. It's just big crystal boys. I would say Seath would be proud, but it's still not giving him the scales he wants, so... Though it does, of course, call back to Seath's research from the first game, which, again, Abyssal Archive will talk about in more detail. Oh, I was hoping for, Oh, darn. I was hoping for a stun there. the way Dark Souls likes to associate greed with humans, I don't know if the future is very promising. Well, yeah, well, again, well, look at our world, right? Because, again, Dark Souls, of course, is a fantasy series, but, of course, it's about, again, it's Dark Souls, humanity, the human condition, the human nature. It's about a commentary, it's very much a commentary on the human condition. So, well, humans are just greedy. That's been us throughout all of human history, so you can philosophize on that all as you will. There we go. Loki, do you think there's any lore significance to the Elder Grew having dragon-like faces? No. I mean, it's not even really kind of oh, okay. I do kind of have something worth commenting on. In cut content, Elder Grews were going to be encountered in, the Consumed King's Garden. There actually is a thing where instead of one of the Cathedral Knights in the big area with the Firstborn's, insignia on the, you know, that elevated, like, I guess courtyard platform or whatever it was called, instead of that, they were gonna have, what do you call it, there we go. Come on, Fido. Oh my god. There we go. They were gonna have one of those there. And there's cut descriptions which give the idea that they would be quote-unquote holy beasts of, like, the forest and stuff like that. Which makes sense so far as, again, we talked in a past stream about how they have white trees that look kind of like the Ulasilian trees. So maybe the idea was those staves were going to be actual legit, like, Ulasil staves type of deal. And that could be connected somehow to, of course, being in, like, holy places and stuff. And the idea would be, okay, so maybe the Grews looking like dragons then. In that case, again, this is me just kind of going off the cuff here, maybe the idea is connecting it to this temple, which, again, no matter what the original, well, whatever the first draft of the game script was going to be, you still have a temple that's connected to Archdragon Peak and the Firstborn here. And, of course, the Lake of the Fire. So that's, and obviously we learned that Gundyr was also going to be encountered in that area instead of Ulsara. So there's always been this idea that, Lothric was a nation founded on both fire linking, the gods, as well as the Firstborn and stuff. So maybe that's connected somehow, earlier on. But in the final game, no, I do not think it has any bearing whatsoever. I think it's just a case of them reusing models for the Grews and the Elder Grews. Maybe they were connected originally, maybe they were not. Obviously, there's huge physiological differences between the two enemy models, so maybe they had a different idea, and then they just said, no, we'll just create this thing called the Grews, and we'll mix it all together, and yada yada, right? And this is something you have to accept. Sometimes, not every little detail in the game is actually consistent with the lore of the final game. Sometimes, this stuff, it's a cool detail, it may reflect an initial concept or a draft of what they had, but it's not going to be lore relevant, because ultimately, this is a video game, and they're reusing areas and models and stuff. And they're just basically kind of, they're playing musical chairs where they put this area connected to this other area, put certain enemies in this area, put certain items, and that's how they tell their stories. Which makes it very flexible for them, right? Because they can go through multiple drafts of the script without necessarily even having to pen too much, because, hey, we'll just reuse this stuff and we'll just change around the enemies and a few item descriptions and the items that you can, where you can find the items, and it'll all be Gucci, right? And sometimes you just kind of have to accept that, okay, this might reflect an earlier drafted thing. Like, again, I talked about that with Sullivan, for example, and how his design is, obviously a lot of people have been like, oh, he doesn't really look like a pope, he looks more like a king, and he, you know, what's with the whole white cloth thing over his face or whatever, so, like, you don't really get to see his face, and, well, he's kind of barefoot for this thing and all that. All that's connected to the idea that originally Sullivan wasn't Sullivan, he was supposed to be, Aldrich was actually supposed to be Sullivan, and, Sullivan was going to be the, Lord of Cinder final boss that you would encounter at the end of the game, sort of bring the Eclipse theme, which was much more prominent at that point in development, sort of together, where you'd have a guy who he would be a Lord of Cinder, but he would be corrupted. Again, giant stagnation with the tree wings and all that, and obviously the roots we see growing over the face and at his skirt and all that. I guess I should say the robe. But the point is being that they had a different idea for him, but then they were like, okay, we'll take this model, plop it in Irithyll, replacing what was called the Moonlight Witch, the Flame Witch that we see serving Sullivan in the final game, and just be like, okay, we will now separate the Sullivan character, who is Aldrich, into two separate characters, the the tyrannical rule, so the tyrant of Irithyll who's taken over, and the God Eater would become two separate characters, which granted I think was narrative genius, because and the whole dynamic between Aldrich and Sullivan, how Sullivan kind of inadvertently created Aldrich, then Aldrich sort of comes back and overthrows Sullivan, and Sullivan's trying to undermine him. Like, that is just so much more narratively interesting than if Sullivan and Aldrich's characters were combined into one. It was just like, oh, Aldrich came, took over Irithyll, started eating Gwyndolin, yada yada, right? It's just a lot more cooler what we got. And that's something that you'll just have to kind of live with. You know, all the details, do they all perfectly fit with the final game? No, there's going to be a few oddities. You just kind of have to roll with it. You guys are coming up with some banger questions, though, this stream. Like, holy hell. I guess the freaking vacuum of the abyss here is causing you guys to want to fill it up with stuff. We want to get out of here before he goes roly-poly, so... Ah, your stamina is so big! Stagger! There we go, you're dead. Sometimes I wonder what the original Dark Souls 3 looked like. If you actually look, there's actually people who are working on trying to at least recreate the visual thing of what we see from concept art and just what we know from content and things like that, which I think is really cool. Now, personally, I have my reservations about Dark Souls 3's narrative. I talked about this a few streams ago, a little bit. Generally, my position is the closer you get to Firelink Shrine and the premise for our journey and all that, the less I'm amused by Dark Souls 3's narrative. It gets a little more nonsensical to me, or I should say, contrived. But generally speaking, I like what we ended up getting. I think the lore ended up being really cool. It ended up being there's only like a handful of typos for this game, despite having similar development problems like Dark Souls 2, which again speaks much to the quality of the developers in charge. But anyway, this is not a Dark Souls 2 hate stream. Yeah, that's it. Nothing else here. Again, this lighting made a lot more sense when this thing was daytime. And there was an item there, and a big spooky boy there. Now it's just like, okay. Just random bright spots, I guess. We rollin'. Yeah, I've been following the modder trying to recreate the alpha, I think, but it... Hit enter by mistake. Understandable. Don't worry. Mistakes like that happen all the time. Oh, I died, so... Gotta do this for the thing I want. Now, again, I told you to remember the whole crystallization shtick earlier. This is going to be important for now. Now, where we would normally find a bonfire, we instead find an invasion by Crimhilled. Go away. Now, Crimhilled invading here is not special to this area, because again, it's the cemetery, it's near Lothric. We know that she is in the Grand Archives. So again, the idea that her invasion spirit would have her invade here, yeah, totally understandable. Whether it was in this dark dimension or not. As we can see, she knows crystal sorceries, including the crystal hail of the crystal sages. As we will later learn, she is, of course, their apprentice. Now, you might ask yourself, how did this woman end up becoming the apprentice to the successors to Logan, with all of his crystal knowledge? Well, as we know, the crystal sages were in the Grand Archives. One of them later going to Faron, because very interested in all the stuff to be discovered there. Oh. But our maiden here, or as Daughter of Crystal, as the localization likes to call her, she found them at the Grand Archives. But what's weird is that she has the clothes of a Firekeeper, which tells us that she was a Firekeeper in training. She's obviously not blind. so she didn't complete it the same. This also tells us she's probably a local, because as we see with Kareem and Arena, they already do the whole preparing them to be Firekeepers on the spot in Kareem before sending them traveling with an escort to mirror Keitha and Morn. So the point being, of course... Oh! Ouch, that hurt. The point being, of course, that, oh, she seems to be a local Firekeeper. Well, how is it that she ends up in the Grand Archives if she's supposed to be, like, studying, presumably here at Firelink, and ends up meeting the Crystal Sages, so she becomes studying crystals? Well, again, we established earlier how the Estus ring was being brought to the Queen by someone. And as we saw with that ring, there were, of course, crystallization involved. And this person apparently didn't know what to do, so they went to the Queen for advice, and the Queen basically said, okay, we'll just bury it back in the cemetery, it'll be fine. I'll treat it like one of my blessings. But apparently, this would require someone who, of course, went to Firelink, or was at there. Now, as we know, the regular ring, while I continue to strafe this woman... Oh! There we go. Now, this regular ring, as we know, was given to a actual Firekeeper, so she could give it to her hero in person. That never occurred, but again, we can imagine this happening, of course, with other Estus rings. But obviously, this Firekeeper who must have had this, or Firekeeper-to-be, who had this Estus ring, ended up having hers get some ash on it, and ended up crystallizing and turning into what we see. And then she apparently went to the Queen. Well... that gives us a perfect through line for Crimhilled here, who happens to invade us, of course, where a bonfire should be. Was supposed to be a Firekeeper. So funny little thematic choice here, but the idea being, of course, is that she's obviously someone who is closely associated with this place, and we encounter her just after acquiring that Estus ring. Alright. Up, up, up. There we go. So imagine here that our Crimhilled is a wannabe Firekeeper. She suddenly has this weird crystallized ring going, so she goes to the Queen wondering what is going on and what she should do. Queen's like, okay, I'll take it off your hands and put it back in the cemetery, things are fine. But Crimhilled, having gone to the castle, apparently, to meet the Queen, is like, God, I really don't know much about that, but that weird crystal thing was odd. I wonder what that's all about. I'm a woman of faith. I don't know anything about how the world actually works. So she ends up going to the Grand Archives. Imagine. And there at the Grand Archives, when she's just perusing some books for information on crystallization, she meets the Crystal Sages, who of course are experts in the field, and then she becomes enthralled and ends up becoming their apprentice and abandons the path of the clergywoman. So again, God, I love Dark Souls storytelling because of how they told that. But the point is, of course, is that the idea that Crimhilled is, this is likely how all of this ends up working together with Crimhilled, and then she ends up becoming their close associate. Now, again, if she's going to the Grand Archives, you may notice, where is she getting the Red Eye Orb to invade? Well, as we established earlier, a Dark Wraith is imprisoned, and I said earlier that it's probably he wasn't the only one, because why would anyone, no matter how unlikely it is, try to challenge to destroy an entire kingdom by invading over its walls by yourself? It's obvious that Dark Wraith, who was in prison, probably had friends, and those friends were probably killed, and he was just captured because, for, again, as we talked about, for probably various reasons, information, novelty, whatever it be. And he's been, like, left to rot in the bottom of the thing. Still doesn't make sense why they don't confiscate his Red Eye Orb and all his armor and equipment, so that way he doesn't cause more trouble, but hey, it's Dark Souls. Prisons never make sense in Dark Souls. Anyway. The idea being is that if he had friends, then it makes sense that their Red Eye Orbs would be collected after their death and would be studied by the Grand Archives, because again, they study that type of stuff. And then, therefore, it could be imaginable that after Crimhilled becomes the Crystal Sage's apprentice, who are at the Grand Archives, she might pick up one of the Red Eye Orbs and use it. And again, also highlights how she has fallen from the faith, because now she doesn't using this evil, dark product for her own purposes. Aldrich lore is one of my favorite parts of the Dark Souls story. He has a lot of synergy with various themes that the story was built on. Exactly. And more than you would know. Again, Abyssal Archive will cover this with New Londo, but let's just say cannibalism didn't start with Aldrich. And the way that Aldrich sort of brings so many different things together, both for Dark Souls 3 and past games, is just, oh, I love it. And again, I think separating Aldrich from Sullivan as characters and making them different people works so much to the game's advantage by just creating a more interesting character dynamic. Because Sullivan is a top-tier villain. Aldrich is a top-tier villain. Both of them playing off each other, perfection. As we see, similar to last time, more of these Gravekeepers who are basically like, oh, I can't do this. This is too hard. Pus is too scary. Some of them throwing... Again, we see some with bandit knives and throwing knives as if they've given up and become possibly just, you know, grave robbers. But might just be a case of reskinning. Either way, we also see how their weapons aren't destroyed. If I recall correctly, we see more of them with broken weapons. We don't see that as much here. I may be misremembering, though. There we go. Oh, no, we still find guys with broken weapons, so yeah, maybe I'm just misremembering. Again, Hidden Blessing, makes sense. It's one of our burial gifts. We're going to find that here, and this is a higher level area, so the developers have incentive to want us to acquire more of these. Again, fire bolts because, pus. Unfortunately, Lothric apparently can't fund the Gravekeepers to have, like, good items. Oh! Oh. Okay. Okay. This was not how I was expecting this to go. Okay, so, what else can we talk about in the lead up to Gundyr? Again, we've established the idea that a lot of what we're seeing here is the past. Oh. There we go. So this becomes the question, why are we seeing the past? Well, as we established earlier, light is time, so absence of light means no time, meaning that time and space essentially folds, and therefore, theoretically, anything could happen. Now, I talked about how that makes my head hurt, so I don't try to think about the Age of Dark as a theoretical possibility until we actually experience it, which will be never. But as the sneak peek here shows, basically, different periods of time, past, future, present, whatever, can all be occurring here at any random point. And so, therefore, we are essentially killing people in the past, in the future. Lothric can't even afford some Gravekeepers, it seems. Well, yeah, right, because the idea with the Gravekeepers is they have the holy chimes of undead cleric, given to, I think it's either Lothric clerics or undead clerics. Do we have one of them on? No, we don't. Oh, right. Also, previous stream when I was farming, I picked up my mendicant staff. You don't know how many freaking, that snake man, shaman, priest, whatever, I had to kill. Go to the bonfire, run over, kill him, come back, rest of the bonfire, repeat. Ah, that was monotonous for 2 hours, but oh boy, finally, I got my my souls because I'm a greedy Lord of Hollows. Oh, okay. I don't know what that was, game, but well, I'll take it. Oh. Ow. Oh no. I gotta worry about you first. But yeah, Lothric can't, Lothric seems to just take their priests, and when they turn on their dead, they're like, hey, you've been a wonderful servant of God. You know how you can continue serving them? Become a grave warden, you undead trash. And then they don't even give them good equipment. They're just like, you can, like, have whatever's left over. We'll compensate you eventually, maybe. The gods, always rewarding the faithful. Oh. There we go. Woo. Now, as we know in the past, Gundyr was, our good old Gundyr was, a judge. The localization called them Iodex or Eudex or however the Latin is pronounced, but the Japanese just meant a judge of ash. And the point being is like, okay, we face him. He's possessed by the pus of man. Humanity's probably eaten his boss soul, so all we get is the sword we stuck out of him. Again, another example of gameplay trumping lore. We take out the sword, but we don't quote-unquote receive the item until after we defeat Gundyr. The idea being is, of course, the game kind of just assumes we don't die to Gundyr as the first tutorial boss. The idea is that we take out the sword, we beat him, and we get the sword, right? Like, again, same thing with most bosses. Most bosses, the game kind of just, especially if they have multiple phases, they just sort of rewind time, quote-unquote, and pretend that didn't happen. But anyway, point is, as we can see here, Gundyr is here, but he's not possessed by the pus. He is kneeling down. There is, of course, these candles around him, so it's possible that these, of course, can't take this too seriously, but it's possible maybe he's trying to add light to this dark place. Obviously, this is, I think, one of the only areas that has candlelight in it. Very possible that's the idea. He's trying to put light to this dark cemetery. But suffice to say, they reuse the animation of him kneeling down, but that might be what they're going for. It's like, oh, he's just, you know, kneeling down, lighting some candles, placing them around, yada yada. Now, of course, candles, another lore thing. Who keeps all the candles lit in a, like, a catacomb where everybody is dead or, you know, dying or whatever? Listen, Miyazaki just really liked candles for this game for some reason. He was like, put candles everywhere. Who is worse? Gwyn, the tragic hero, lol, versus Sullivan, the pretentious pope, versus Aldrich, Giga Chad cannibal. I stick by what I said last time. Gwyn has had more of an effect. Like, let's be honest. The only reason Sullivan and Aldrich were able to exist was because of Gwyn. It's like, he is the one responsible of everything that happens in this universe, because he decided he was going to perpetuate this system of trying to preserve the world, quote unquote. But as we can see, this world is just perpetually dying, but won't die. It's as undead as we are. Again, nothing really to say here. We'll wait until we get Gundyr killed and all that. Now notice in this area, there is a corpse with a Black Knight glaive, implying this is a Black Knight. As we will be seeing more of them in the future. There he is. But if you told me who to pick between Sullivan and Aldrich, I would probably go with... I would go with Aldrich. Because Sullivan, at least, has the decency to try to rule in a way which is, again, it's sort of like he's the perfect candidate for Machiavelli's The Prince. He will try to rule with fear, but he also wants to kind of have respect and uses charity, right? Like, if you're his friend, he'll help you, he'll give you whatever you need to stay in power or whatever. Aldrich is kind of like that, but only so far as in, like, hey, you gotta be like a cannibal like me. Like, Sullivan's gonna let, like, if you want to actually believe the Way of White's message and all that, he's totally okay with that. It doesn't matter to him. He's gonna be a hypocrite in his own home or whatever. Like, you can go out though and preach the faith or whatever. As long as he's able to preserve his power, he doesn't care. So that's at least what he's got going for him, which is not saying much, but c'est la vie. So Gwyn is the worst person literally ever. Yes. Yeah, just fuck Gwyn. Abyssal Archive will show how bad Gwyn is. Again, reminder, Gwyn is Gwendolyn's dad and Priscilla is his mom. You don't want to know how that worked out. Or how that happened, I should say. Oh boy. Or if you do, you can again purchase Abyssal Archive. Go to abyssalarchive.com for more information. Shameless shill. Okay, what's our damage here? Not bad. What's our pyromancy though? So here is champion gun. Oh, I accidentally tried to mind control Gundyr. It did not work. Who would have thought that a strong enemy who has enough firepower to heat us upon defeat would not be distracted by flame? Oh. Oh yeah, that's God, why is pyromancy so freaking stupid? Oh. Oh. Woo. That's more important to me. Oh! Yeah, that classic. Oh, that was too early, just slightly. Oh. waiting for the shoulder check. Oh. Ooh. I actually thought that was going to hit me. I thought I dodge rolled out of that a little too late, but apparently not. There's the shoulder check. I was waiting for that classic. I love the music. Oh, that was way too early. Oh, and that was stupid. I should have gone for the roll. When is Abyssal Archive coming out? Early next year for the physical copy. The digital copy will be available as soon as it is finalized. Now, I have officially already signed off on the last bit for the first edition, so hopefully there aren't any more mistakes. We were pretty thorough between editing and all that, so I would hope that we made sure that all our facts and our grammar and all that is in order. And we had some great help from different people on the inside that helped us really kind of work through this, so it wasn't just our eyes. Because after you read like a 2-volume manuscript for like the 50th time, it gets a little it all starts looking the same. I would love to get Abyssal Archive, but I don't have 280 just lying around, Lamau. Again, you can get the digital version. That will be, again, coming out when it's available. Hopefully within, like, a few weeks to, like, a month or two. Like, we'll see. It should be hopefully available before the end of the year. Because, again, digital is obviously a lot easier than the physical. The physical, we gotta wait till the printers are finished doing their thing. Oh. That's not how I want to do this, but okay. Hey. There we go. Where are my souls? There we go. Oh, that was a miss. A swing and a miss. Woo! Oh, that's gonna hit me. Oh, that did it. I was just out of range. Alright, I'm actually doing okay spacing him. Oh, dang. I literally rolled. Oh! Darn! Ah! I messed up the timing. I'll probably try to get a job and save up for it. Yeah, don't worry. The digital version will be, of course, obviously significantly cheaper. The physical version is, again, the publisher emphasizes quality, and I really appreciate that from them. And obviously, if you've seen it at abyssalarchive.com, the details of it's just so good. I really love it. But yeah, it is a bit pricey, so for 2 volumes. So it's like, whoop. I understand. Don't worry. Obviously, you have me here talking about a lot of the details, and of course, I also am freely talking about Dark Souls 2 and 3 anyway, so... But yeah, for all those who have supported with Abyssal Archive, I appreciate it. It's so much work doing a lot of this, honestly, for my free time. And, like, doing something like Corpse Party, I haven't done in, like, forever. So it's like, it's just great to be able to do something different, not related to Souls in my free time. And you guys make it possible by helping it be financially worthwhile. Now, speaking of worthwhile, let's try to get this guy done 3rd time. Oh boy. Not if I mess up timings as easy as that. That was a super simple one. So it should be, yeah. I'm pretty sure the range on those two is the same. Oh! Woo! Oh! And there's the kick. Oh, the grab. Oh. I don't know how I mostly got around that. Oh. Oh my god, I did it twice. Oh! Not 3rd time, though. Oh, that was still worth it. Ooh. I'm I'm learning. Oh, well. Never mind. I learned nothing. Oh my gosh. Ooh, and I rolled. Stop dodging! Stop doing that thing that players can do. Oh. Get him. There we go. My greed! Greed! Just quickly, quick it! Come on! Yeah! I got extra souls! Yeah, I bought a copy. Yeah. I'm confident everyone... I'm confident it... Again, like, not to toot my own horn, but I'm confident in saying that it is probably the best... it's probably one of the best Souls books on the market. Do you have plans to do kind of project with other From games? Do this kind of project. Gundyr has a nasty kick, man. Yeah, he does. Let's see. Yes. Abyssal Archive has been a success. So, it's proved... Again, this was something completely new that I've never done before. Obviously, in my life, I don't do nonfiction generally. But it's really cool to have had, essentially... to have you guys, like, really come out and support and really help, like, from all over the globe. So many people, so many fans, so much love for Souls and Souls lore and all that, and wanting to understand the truth and having, like, sort of really advance the scholarship of not just Dark Souls, but to video games in general. And I think that I will in fact be doing, like, I don't know if we'll, like one thing I've been thinking of, okay, like, will I do a Abyssal Archive 2 for Dark Souls 2 and Abyssal Archive 3 for Dark Souls 3 when I inevitably finish writing analyses for all those games. I basically complete them, because I have them all on the website, right? So do I want to compile that and do something similar? We might. Especially if you guys are up for it, if you want to have, like, your own personal copy on your shelf, or maybe you want to have a finalized copy in, like, a PDF format, or again, Vati's doing the audiobook, which is we're going to be doing sometime in the future after the digital and physical come out. So, like, you guys, like, yeah, totally, like, we could totally have something where it's like, if you want any of that type of packaging to my website work, we could do that. Same with Bloodborne, same with Demon Souls. I would love to continue, like, doing all that more, because one, if you, like, see some of the artwork and stuff that comes with Abyssal Archive and thing, like, oh, I would love to see artists do more of that. Just getting, like quote-unquote, like, more lore-friendly art portraying scenes you don't normally get to see in Souls is just so satisfying. Loki, can we expect more posts on your website on the Painted World of Ariandel and the Ring City? Yes, I will eventually get to the DLC. I've almost exhausted most of the regular Dark Souls areas, you may have noticed. Obviously, I'm talking about in this lore play tons of that. I do have to get to them. Now, the problem is, when I entered the English community, it was around the time Ring City was coming out. So we had a bit of a problem there. That problem being, I haven't thought on the rest of the DLC to the same extent that I've done with the other game, because I've been so busy looking back and like super hyper analyzing the base game when I was doing my stuff on Dark Souls 1, and eventually I was doing it for Dark Souls 2 and 3, because again, all of this stems from me wanting to highlight how there are localization problems in From Software games, and when corrected, the lore for these games becomes a lot less esoteric. Sure, there's always going to be the negative Nancys who are like, well, you can't ever say that's 100% true. Well, nothing in life is ever 100% certain. But again, we all understand how storytelling works, and narratives are told, and probability. So once you account for errors in the Japanese script, you can really start seeing how consistent and cohesive the stories and world of Dark Souls is. And this has been, again, I've shown this again with Demon Souls. I'm doing it again with Bloodborne. As far as Dark Souls 2 and 3 is concerned, I'd like to eventually finish off and cover them. Because again, I do have my ideas, I do have, like, rough, like, concepts and conclusion things. Obviously, when we were going through Ariandel, I was sharing a lot of that on the fly, but that stuff isn't, like, my finalized, crystallized. I've checked I've dotted every I, crossed every T, made sure that every little thing is perfectly in line with how it should be, and that there aren't any like room for errors and all that. So like again, we'll see how things develop, but generally what I'm sharing with you guys is stuff where I'm fairly certain I'm right. Nothing here, though we'll have to come back here later when Cirrus dies. I'd love to get one for Dark Souls 2 and 3. Okay, then I will seriously consider adding them. Now these boys have fire resistance because of their armor, so I don't know if this is going to do much. Or not. Listen, you're telling me that your armor could handle Chaos Fire without getting a scratch, but had to be turned black by the first flame, and yet it apparently can't protect you from a Chaos Pyromancy? Ree! It's not lore accurate! Ree! I'm just that strong, I guess. So again, as we said, Black Knights, you can find them anywhere. They just wander the world. So Miyazaki's like, hey, we could put Black Knights here. Now, fun fact, originally, Black Knights were going to appear in Anor Londo. The idea was, when Anor Londo turned nighttime, they were going to replace all the Silver Knight spawns with Black Knight spawns. This is why the Silver Knights disappear in the final game. Inexplicably. But, the idea, of course, being that they wanted to have a thing where it's like, okay, you know, Silver Knight's daytime, Black Knight's nighttime. Now, you might be wondering, how does that make any lick of sense in the lore? It doesn't, and it's cut content for probably that reason. But that's probably what the developers, being super meta, especially when it comes to internal stuff, with that only the developers would know, and we only get gleaned about through either names or DesignWorks interviews and stuff like that, which gives us an idea. They probably were like, oh hey, the dark version of the Cemetery of Ash. Let's put Black Knights here, because we're cheeky. No, you're just a really good pyromancer. I'd get a Dark Souls 3 book, yeah. Jockkick's like, Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 3, sure. Dark Souls 2, bleh. Understandable. Yeah, I don't know how a Dark Souls 2 book would fare. Because I think because from what I've seen in terms of sales numbers, at least those that have been announced, Dark Souls 2 really didn't sell that well compared to the others. Like, it sold, I think, similar to Bloodborne, and Bloodborne was, like, console exclusive. So, like, of course, Bloodborne's not going to sell as well as, like, a Dark Souls 3 or Elden Ring. So, like, and I think it's still undersold Dark Souls 2, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sorry, I think Dark Souls 2 still undersold Bloodborne, so, again, I have no idea how popular a Dark Souls 2 book would be, except for those of you who really want the completionist lore. Granted, Dark Souls 2 is essential to understanding Dark Souls 3, so maybe people would want the full set. I don't know. I gotta finish my Dark Souls 2 work on my website first. This is obviously talk about stuff for years in the future. I like a few areas in Dark Souls 2. I'm sure you can find a few areas that a lot of people who don't like Dark Souls 2 like Dark Souls 2. The problem with Dark Souls 2 isn't some of the few areas in Dark Souls 2 which are kind of nice. The problem is Dark Souls 2. But again, this isn't a Dark Souls 2 hate stream, so I'm gonna end it here. I want to not shit on the 2 Dark Souls fans that are in the chat. All 2 of them in the entire world, and one of them is Ots. Chaos Blade here. As you may recall, we fought the Master here. He actually uses the Chaos Blade in some summons. In fact, I think we could summon him for Gundyr earlier. The point being, of course, is that he has a Chaos Blade. As we know, Lothric and Irithel went to war with the demons and brought back spoils of war. It's very likely that our Katana Master, using the Uchi Katana, is possibly an Easterner. Again, as we know, Lothric does have some same amount of influence from the East as the other 2 settings of the game, which again, they're all along a vertical axis. So the idea that the Chaos Blade was acquired from the war makes sense. Now, here's where things get interesting. Chaos Blades aren't just any random weapon. They are produced from the soul of a Chaos Witch, whether it's the Witch of Izalith, as seen in Dark Souls 2, or one of her Daughters of Chaos, such as Quelaag in Dark Souls 1. So this would imply that our boy here did some soul transposition or something to that effect. Again, maybe the Grand Archive says something similar, what have you, with the soul of Quelaag. Oh, I mean, sorry, with the soul of a witch. Sorry, Chaos Witch, not Quelaag specifically. So it's like, okay, well, who's the Chaos Witch? Well, as you may recall, we found 2 Chaos Witches, the Fair Lady and Quelana. So the idea that our master, who I'm wearing the torn clothes of, is in all likelihood the person who took part in killing our 2 favorite waifus. Majula and Hade's Tower of Flame are gorgeous. I disagree with Hades, but I agree with Majula. When I first played Dark Souls 2 for the very first time, that was the first and only time that Dark Souls 2 wowed me. When I came out and I just saw Majula, the grass like flowing in the wind, the orange sunset and all that, like that will definitely be an unforgettable moment. Hades, eh. My problem with, say, the art style in Dark Souls 2, again, besides the fact that the graphics just aren't good, obviously, they totally, advertisements completely oversold the final product, is that everything in Dark Souls 2 looks so dry. Whereas in Dark Souls 3, it has kind of the opposite problem, where a lot of stuff in most of this game looks so wet. Like, just look at the dirt here, the way it shines and stuff like that. Like, just, everything looks so wet. Whereas Dark Souls 2, everything's so dry and desaturated, it's like, ugh. Both of them I don't like. But again, Dark Souls 3 obviously does look better, as graphically and all that stuff. I'm just, like, nitpicking the art styles. Again, I'm going to end the Dark Souls 2 talk for once and for all. Okay, we'll go get that item in a sec. What's important here is our Black Knight bro. Again, they are wandering the world, so a bunch of them seem to have come and ended up again in this dimension. Now, as I talked about the whole idea earlier, before we got taken off track by you guys having some really good questions and stuff. Why am I not using Pyromancy? Oh, because I run out. Oh. That's why. I'm about to lose 161k souls. Better not. This is a moment where we put on that ever-trusty Ring of Sacrifice, because I am not risking that, losing all those souls. Yeah, this is the weaker one, right? And we don't really need it. It's gonna take 2 shots on them anyway. Yeah. There we go. Sorry, no more DS2. Majula's OST is God tier. Yeah, that's a good song too. Yeah. I mean, generally, I don't think Dark Souls 2... Okay, like, obviously, everyone's gonna have their own taste, and not all the music is all the same level, but, like, Dark Souls music, in general, the OST is pretty good. Like, Gundyr had a very cool, theme. Ooh. My only problem with Dark Souls 3 is it has the Bloodborne effect, where everything has to be a goddamn, classical music choir. And it's like... Demon Souls Remake had the same problem. Like, you don't need everything to be a goddamn choir. I get it. Oh, it makes it sound so epic and, you know, divine and godly and blah, 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 blah. Sure. I get you. But, like, you don't need to do it. Everything starts sounding the same. And you have, like, a few standout tracks and then everything just literally sounding the same. Dark Souls 2 didn't really have that problem, I think, because they didn't have the choir issue yet. Same with Dark Souls 1. You could actually have, like, multiple genres of music, which were just multiple genres of music. That basically kind of kept in, like, traditional, nothing poppy or anything, but, like, it still didn't all sounded very different from each other. Dark Souls 3 is a bit harder overall to tell which, what really you can remember as, like, a standout track. I like the opening, the start screens for all of them, though. Like, just, so good for each game. Didn't they add a choir to the Nexus? They had a choir everywhere in the Demon Souls remake. Again, like I said, it's the Bloodborne effect. Everything has to be this giant, like, choir epic sound. And granted, sometimes it works out, right? Like, sometimes you get, like, a Ludwig the Holy Blade, and you have this really unique sounding classical music song, right? That it's really good, it's really memorable, it really stands out from the rest. But then, for every one of those, and for every, like, dancer or what have you, you're gonna have a bunch of, like, Vort or something. Like, does anyone remember Vort's theme? I don't. It just exists. I just remember it as a more classical choir noise. It's loud, it's blaring constantly. And again, just has that same general feel as everything else. There we go. Yeah, the original Demon Souls OST was so unique and special, while the remake was a bit generic. Yeah, there was a problem. Like, Yeah, and I think the problem with the Demon Souls remake was when they were doing like these reverbs, a lot of the original tune gets lost, so you don't really even hear it. Like compare, like one of my favorite, like a good example of this is just compare old Heroes, regular and remake. Like they don't even sound like they're the same song. Period. Like they sound like they're completely different, come from completely different games. Okay, so we got our Black Knight buddy done for. Right. As I was saying earlier, the idea that the world without light is in the dark, this would imply, of course, that we are in the abyss. That, okay, but how is that possible? Because the Lothric that we go to is not in the abyss. So why are we in an abyss here when we can still go to Firelink Shrine, which is not in the abyss? What happened while we were gone? Well, as we established, the issue seems to be that, much like in Things Betwixt, where we kind of just walking through a gap in the between dimensions and then transition smoothly into Bajula inside the time bubble, we kind of have done the same from Oceros's Consumed Garden. The idea being is that, okay, we walk into a dimension where is the cemetery that existed behind the original temple, but it's captured in this pure darkness, hence why it's its own dimension. This would imply, of course, an abyss. Well, what abyss would allow all of this and all these different time periods to happen? Very likely the end of time itself. We are quite possibly experiencing the Age of Dark right now. That this is, no matter what happens, Age of Deep Seas, whichever, well, I guess Age of Deep Seas isn't going to happen because of the way our game plays out, but basically, no matter what ending we choose, this will end up happening one way or the other at some point. And therefore, time is, of course, absolutely worthless, so we're just experiencing all the different periods that the cemetery has experienced in the past at this juncture. And that Gundyr is from the far past, because, well, we'll talk about him in a sec. Before that, we see Hawkwood's little monument to the Abyss Watchers here. There is an item. Now, this item only shows up after you kill the Abyss Watchers, so don't consider it lore relevant. It's likely just a quote-unquote quest reward that they're putting here because, well, it's Kiaran's ring. And Kiaran, of course, is an Artorias fangirl who we, of course, encounter in the DLC. And obviously, the idea that you would have her ring juxtaposed with the successors to Artorias makes sense. Obviously, we're going to also see more Artorias stuff inside. But again, this ring only shows up if you've killed the Abyss Watchers first. So again, and for those wondering, well, wait a second, don't you have to? No. You can, theoretically, defeat Dancer, defeat Oceros, defeat Gundyr, and get here before encountering the Abyss Watchers. You technically can do it. Is it likely? No. But it's technically possible. Also, how's this in the past if we're still in the Age of Fire in the future? Well, again, because in the Age of Dark, time is gone. There is no causality. All events essentially happen in simultaneity. Because again, there is no linear time. There is no progression. It is just the dark. This is the concept of light being time. You can only see time, you can only know time is progressing because you can have light illuminating the space that you exist in, showing you how things change in progression, which we call, again, the passage of time. Again, this is also the idea of the dark as the shadow to that. Obviously, the dark produces shadows, and as the light changes and moves, obviously the shadows move with it and all that point. Again, and then obviously when the light finally is gone, then everything is in total darkness. Because, don't you start, Eric! Time is convoluted. No, we've had our time is convoluted joke in the beginning already. So, also, how does this being the end of time work with the Ring City? There, everything was collapsed on itself and ash wasted. We'll talk about Ring City when we get there. The short answer, of course, is we're also seeing, we're also not seeing necessarily time sort of collapsing in on itself. We are seeing another level in the stagnation and the end of the world, though, yes. The point being, of course, is that we're just getting a taste of that. We're getting an idea of what the total darkness is like in this limited, extremely limited space. Now, the reason why this is so important and why I say, okay, yes, this is probably the Abyss, post-fire and everything and all that, is that besides the fact that it's whole darkness and we're seeing causality absolutely be completely meaningless compared to other abysses that we've been in, we're also seeing, of course, the past and future intersect. Now, I don't think we made the conditions to have him spawn here, but you can get Yol's ashes here. I think Yuria has to not, like, spawn because we do a different thing or whatever for him to be here. But the idea is, like, we'll have a corpse on the wall here near where he is, and it'll have his ashes, of course. The idea being is we see Yol as a corpse, and then, obviously, this is the future where Yol eventually turns into ashes, and his ashes are, like, moved to, like, the corner or whatever, right? To, you know, slightly more out of the way. We, of course, also see this, the coiled sword fragment, the idea of the sword in the far future when there's no longer the bonfire, there's just the sword left behind. Well, as you may recall, we don't see this far future in of a ruined Firelink Shrine until the end of the game when we're gonna fight the Soul of Cinder. So this is, again, another example of, okay, it's not just the past that we're experiencing, we're also experiencing events in the future. Now, of course, we do see some past stuff, or possibly future stuff, again here, where we can get Andre's hammer and loot it from here. Obviously, Andre himself isn't brought in at this period. This seems to be a period where he is gone and his hammer is here. Is this after the events of the game as we know it? Is this just when he happened to be on break? That he happened to leave his hammer behind? And he's like, ah, drat, I have to now get a new one, Rada. Gotta make a request. No. I don't know, but you can get the idea. Now, we also find, of course, the handmaid was also dragged in here. So it's not just enemies, thankfully. Now, if you talk to her, she...
Well, fancy that. A lost lamb wandereth in, with nary a peep from the bell. Well, thou shouldst my purpose know. What can this old handmaid provide thee?
Of course, two things. One, she's surprised to see us here because the bell didn't ring. So what are Unkindled doing up and about? They should be still sealed. So this tells us this is before we meet the handmaid in Firelink Shrine proper at the beginning of the game. Now this is reinforced by if you do Untended Graves first, before ever talking to the handmaid at Firelink Shrine, again in the normal cemetery, she will actually have a reaction now, because obviously the game can now confirm that we have, of course, met her here first. This is technically our first encounter. And if we actually make it canonically our first encounter with her here in the game, then the first time we meet her in Firelink Shrine, she'll react and be like, oh, well, and then she'll, like, brush it off being like, oh, never mind, Ashen One, like, how can I help her, whatever, right? Like, she'll continue with her normal dialogue. The point being, of course, is that, she seems to not be fazed by all this darkness and stuff here, but she is kind of wondering, hey, bell hasn't rung, what exactly are you doing? But, oh, well, whatever. You seem to somehow or whatever know what I'm supposed to give you, so, what do you need? Now, again, reinforcing the idea of her being kind of a grave robber, and not necessarily, though, canonically grave robbing all the enemies and stuff we have. We can, of course, get Artorias' set. Obviously, he's dead. He was buried in a grave. You can kind of joke, imagine, like, she goes all the way to Dark Souls 2 setting, finds Artorias' like Taftorn or whatever grave, and like digs it up to get this armor. But she basically has his corrupted armor. Again, it reinforces the idea that we are in the abyss, because this is what happened to him. Again, it also reinforces the idea that that he, of course, he is the Wolfblood's quote-unquote owner / master. So the idea being is that he left it behind for the old wolf to inherit from Sif, and then eventually for the Abyss Watchers to inherit when they drink the old wolf's blood. And that much like how you can look at this corrupted armor and see, oh, that's how Artorias ended, the Abyss Watchers will, of course, as we see, have that same fate. They will also, of course, have their armor corrupted. That's not itself bad, it's just blood splatter and stuff. But eventually they too will be truly corrupted, and it will corrode at them, like we see here with like the leg pieces and stuff like that. And eventually, they too will have to be put down, which, again, as we established, the Ariandel DLC fixes the little plot hole of, well, how do Abyss Watchers, if they can't kill each other because of their bond with the soul of the old wolf, so they're technically considered one entity or whatever, they are Legion. The point being is that, how are they gonna deal with that, one of them getting corrupted on the job in the field? Well, the idea is, okay, so we'll have these revenants, these followers, kind of drag them to the realm of the dead. And then everything else is like, you know, standard crap. Nothing like too crazy. Okay, but one thing worth noting is, of course, the priestess ring. So this tells us that, of course, this handmaid is likely, before she was the handmaid and was this lowly grave robbing caretaker of the shrine, she was a high priestess of Lothric like Emma, which tells us she probably was raising a prince at one point as a wet nurse, as this ring establishes.
Well,
Yes. Let's actually get the ring. As it establishes, the high priestesses, besides being, of course, the Japanese for high priestess is ritual chief. In fact, the localization changed this description here to not sort of make a point that the ritual chiefs are all women. It's kind of inherent to the name high priestess, so they don't like explicate that in the description. They just are like, okay, we can skip that and just focus on the important part, which is they even become the prince's wet nurse. So,
best not.
nope. This woman who robbed the Dark Souls 2 Firekeeper's robes was once a true holy woman of Lothric, and she ended up here. Now, again, this makes sense, as we established. Cirrus is her granddaughter, and Hodric is apparently her husband, presumably because she is the granddad. And obviously, Cirrus felt the need to tell Grandma how she was going to go visit Granddad. So again, why mention this? If they're like from like, you know, different branches of the family, it's obvious that the idea is that, hey, I know that this was a significant other who was important to you, so I felt I should just mention that I'm bringing closure for both of us or whatever, yada yada yada. Obviously, you have Lothric and Irithyll having very close relations, so the idea that the High Priestess has similarly close relations with a Holy Knight of Irithyll is not surprising. Again, we've even seen examples of Lothric going to Irithyll physically, so again, not a surprise. Now, as we can see here, there are more illusory walls to hide this chamber where we find in the final game, Arena. Well, I should say the final game. In the regular shrine, that's where Arena goes. But again, much like with Crimhilled, the game decides to be cheeky with references. And instead shows that instead of a would-be Firekeeper, there is an actual Firekeeper. In fact, it's the first Firekeeper in Lothric's system. Again, first is always a difficult word when it comes to Dark Souls. Much like how Gurman is, quote-unquote, the first hunter, even though there are hunters in Cainhurst well before him. In fact, you might even argue there are hunters in Yharnam well before him. And obviously there were been hunters in the Chalice dungeons for well before him throughout history. It's sort of, again, this word where you kind of put an asterisk here, because it's talking about in a very specific context, when absolutes are used like this. This is something which I always recommend when you're doing a text critical analysis. When you see language that you would normally consider, like everyone, always, is like tons of language which you would normally hear used in hyperbole, always remember it's probably just hyperbole, and that there may be exceptions to whatever the statement says. Don't be one of those people who are like, well, we have to take everything it says literally. Well, what does literally mean? What does literally mean when you say, oh, the blacksmith deity passed? Some people will argue, oh, well, it doesn't mean he died, because it didn't say he passed away. Maybe he just, went somewhere. Like, come on. Use your common sense. Demon Souls reference. Yes, the idea that the first Firekeeper is blind, because for those that don't know, the Maiden in Black is the word for maiden isn't just maiden, it's Firekeeper, fire defense woman. That's what, when she calls herself the Kindle Maiden, she's calling herself a Firekeeper, and Dark Souls just brought the term over there. It was one of the many Demon Souls references brought over to Dark Souls. As we can see, she's been buried here. She has, again, in typical Maiden in Black reference, black wax blocking her vision. We dig into that wax and pull out these eyes, which have been corrupted by the darkness. And, well, how fitting that she ends up in that darkness. Would have been great if I'd been told that before my English exam this year. Sorry about that. I am not a tutor. I am not licensed to practice education. But yeah, so we have this terrible situation where this Firekeeper seems to be hidden because she has eyes which are best not revealed. Now, as we come to understand seeing this, these eyes are corrupted by the abyss. If you go to my website, I actually blow up this image large enough so you can kind of see how the pupils literally are almost like the dark sigil. They're these dark holes that are really plungy and they're leaking, of course, darkness. The idea being is that, as Ludleth will reveal in Firelink Shrine, she saw a future where, again, the fire linking had ended. There was no one to link the fire, the Age of Fire came to an end, and as I established, it again reinforced the idea of what we're seeing here in Untended Graves. This is what will happen when the Age of Fire comes to an end. This is a little snippet of what the Age of Dark would be like. And like we said before earlier, much like how not every soul will disappear doesn't mean necessarily all fire would go. Again, Age of Dark versus Age of Fire is more so about, how do we put it? It's more so on a gradient, right? Because as we see, we've been perpetually in this quote-unquote Twilight Age where it's like the fire is kind of dying and it's about to go out, but it won't quite go out, so we're kind of in this weird little limbo that we're going through right now in terms of the universe. And just because, like, the flame itself disappears, just because it'll probably weaken, because everything connected to it, fire, souls, etc., will probably weaken, and some of it may even vanish. Doesn't necessarily mean all of it will. And you'll probably see, like, more of a transition period, where once the first flame is gone, then, like, say, people of Londor and stuff would make it their mission to start, really starting to slowly, remove all the light and the dark, so that way we don't get, like, a potential, bring back the Age of Fire, resistance, rebel, blah, 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 right? So kind of what we see with the Chaos Demons, where they're trying to salvage whatever remnants of the Chaos Flame is left for the purposes of staying alive, and who knows, maybe even trying to resurrect it, though that will probably never happen, especially after we come through. I think that's all for this area, right? Because there's nothing on the top. Oh, we might want to go to the giant, right? Because doesn't it have a seed? Yeah, here's a seed. Yeah, so we get a seed from Big Giant Boy. Sorry, mate, you're not going to have any children. We're stealing them. We can't open this gate yet, even though we've opened it in the quote-unquote future. The ladder isn't here either, as you can see. So they haven't even set that up. It all comes together. So yeah, let's just talk to Granny one last time. Oba-chan! Oba-chan!
Well, thou'rt exceeding lost indeed. What can this old handmaid provide thee?
What can I say? I have no idea where I'm going.
To skirt the curse's grasp. Tarry not for long. 'Tis dark for now, and not a soul stirs. But remember, fires are known to fade in quiet. Or perhaps thou'rt captive already, like the poor girl.
Again, the point being...
To skirt the
blah, blah, blah,
curse's
don't
brow.
care. The point, of course, being is that there is a curse, which Firelink Shrine is keeping all of its staff alive. Her, Andre, and the Firekeeper. The idea of this curse, of course, is that it basically binds them in a way, so that way, at least while they're present here, obviously we can kill the Firekeeper in the kiln once she's far and away from the shrine and all that. But there seems to be that as long as you stay within this general area, and you've been properly connected, as it were, you will be able to be immortal. Now, the handmaid sort of plays cheeky with this, because the Japanese for immortal is also undead. Again, both mean non-death, right? So, like, obviously, both apply. But the point that she makes is that she is quote-unquote undead, and she talks about how we're both undead, we both want souls, but her reason for getting souls, and our reason for getting souls, is of course completely different, because she doesn't have the dark side. She's part of this curse, which is why when we kill her, it becomes this big shocker where it's like, obviously, traditionally in the game, it's like, okay, you kill them, they become maybe a hollow, and then they have to be put down again, but, you know, they're gone for good, right? You get very few Gales who are able to kind of hold on. Or I guess technically the player character. You could also argue our player character is able to stay sane and hold on despite dying, at least in a abstract sense. You don't know how many deaths are quote-unquote canon, right? Anyway, The point is that when if we kill the handmaid, it's like, okay, yeah, she's just another one of those things where she has the undead curse. She's basically going to be gone, right? Because people are going to see she's hollow. They'll put her down. We won't. Then we see her, and she's perfectly fine and well, just sitting in her chair. And then she laughs at us all ominously because she's like, ha ha, I know you thought you had me, but no, I am, because I am undead. I'm actually immortal, and I'm going to now make sure that I jack up my prices for, as a result of this. She's like, you want me to be a greedy old woman? I'll be a greedy old woman. Hey Sarah, so I went back in time and your gran was there and she told me riddles. Oh, that's great. Yeah, so, Granny here really, really made things, different. She was like, yep, I'm not actually, undead like you thought I was pulling your chain. And as a result of this, we know, okay, there's this curse thing that's going on. Again, curses are powers which are even capable, as Abyssal Archive will go into detail about, are powers which are even able to affect the soul. That seems to what defines a curse. It's a very generic type of magic, and it basically can be applied to anything. As we've said before, we've seen cases like, say, with the Grus or the Corvians, where a quote-unquote curse occurs that causes the body and soul to, or the soul, essentially, might change the form and the appearance. Again, Dark Souls 2 also plays with this, with the idea that the old ones, the souls of Gwyn, Izalith, Seath, and Nito, because they're such powerful souls, they have powerful curses, being that their curses being that they possess certain individuals, and these individuals, besides seeming to get eternal life, because again, they're like being like kept alive by the power of that other soul, again, power of life, power of disparity, they're also, of course, being possessed and controlled to varying degrees. Obviously, it depends. Like we see with Izalith, how she's her little bug form, and she kind of crawls into the Lost Sinner and takes control of her from there. Gwyn doesn't seem to really be too much control into Old Iron King, though again, we see the possession with him being like brought into this giant hulking monstrosity. Seath is possessed a spider, and he's trying to redo his research in a little tiny and eventually very big, not so tiny, a spider body. And finally, of course, the Nito ends up possessing the Rotten, which is this massive bodies that has been singular to cross a singular soul. Now, I have some opinions about the Rotten, but that will wait for a Dark Souls 2 stream, and hopefully maybe we'll have my Shulva analysis written and done by then. Let's get out of here. Yeah, we don't need anything else, so... Alright, we are going to Grand Archives today, so I'm going to actually... sleep? Who needs sleep? I'm going to stay up a little bit more to at least get started so my thumbnail isn't a lie.
Well,
souls.
very well then.
Oh god, we're getting really high on the what we need for stuff. Ah, stamina! Ah! That's so tiny. Ah, but I don't want to do this either. Is it going to be attunement? Oh no, we need to do this eventually. It's painful, but it needs to be done. I need more stamina.
Farewell, Ashley.
Alrighty. And obviously we see her, and if this was our second time meeting her after Untended Graves, she'd be like, oh, well, never mind. Surprised to see you again. I didn't expect we would cross paths, but okay, I know why this is happening. Yada, yada, yada. Now for Gundyr. Now, Gundyr, as you may notice, he has a helmet modeled on a king. This implies that he is a king, because again, if you're just a regular knight wearing something in the shape of your king, that's probably not going to go over very well. It's like, I'm the king. Oh, no, you ain't. That said, it tells us, of course, he's a champion or hero. Again, the localization champion or hero, AU, is used to establish him as wants to become a would-be Lord of Cinder, right? He's trying to take the path of becoming a fire-linking hero. The idea, of course, is that Gundyr was apparently trying to get to the Firelink Shrine, though not necessarily this Firelink Shrine, as we'll talk in a moment. But the point being is that he was trying to basically go to commit the fire-linking ritual, but what ended up happening instead was that he ended up in Untended Graves. Now, he's in this place where now, okay, well, there's no bonfire, everything's dark and scary, and what's going on? And as we see, he's, like, possibly lighting candles and all that stuff, and it's like, what a king, right? So, like, oh boy, so we know, okay, he's present, he's fire-linking, and he seems to be a king. and he's again from a very long time ago, given the description. So it's like, huh, old king. Well, here's an odd detail. What type of king would be relevant here in Lothric? Now, needless to say, a lot of people have picked up on how his armor is a reference to Old King Duran. And, well, if you look through Lothric's history, it is very much a obvious reference to Boletaria. There's a lot of parallels, of course, from the slaves to the militarism to even its foundations as a country which was founded on the hunting of coming together to deal with a wyvern menace that was dealing with plaguing the land. So, yeah. Miyazaki was like, I did this before. I'm just gonna steal my own homework and copy-paste it here. Gundyr doesn't have an item that was mistranslated or something related to the festival? Festival? Nothing? Are you referring to here, where it's talked about, like, the ensuing tragic farce or something like that? Because there is this point being made, and this is actually where we get to the relevant. This Gundyr, again, I'm not the first one to point this out, Gundyr is very likely the person who this certain firekeeper, quote-unquote, was supposed to meet, but she ended up not, because, again, he ended up happening to walk into the wrong dimension. I'm sorry, I just took a wrong turn, and somehow I ended up into the far future. Where, of course, he comes across us, and we kill him. Now, this doesn't seem to kill him for good, as we take his soul as a champion, but much like in Dark Souls 2, how we take the Lost Giant soul after previously in the past taking the Giant Lord's soul. Again, those are the same characters. There's some trace of him that's still there and still alive, right? So he's not fully gone. But we end up obviously, basically, he's no longer without his power of his soul and everything. He's probably not going to be able to be the same fire linker that he wanted to before, right? So, like, it's probably too late, they got someone else, whatever, and this is a big tragic, this would make sense why it becomes among the populace, this wonderful, like, this tragic tale that becomes just, like, so widespread. Now, it's never clear if it's loved as a joke, or as a tearful, like, oh, it's so sad, it's such a good tragedy. Late to the festivities was something in the armor. I actually don't remember what the localization put there, so that may be, but yes, what is it? Was best by an unknown warrior, he then became sheathed to a cold sword in the hopes of a guard to be a related champion. Model for a former king. I don't see the festivities line. It may be his weapon, so let's double check for you, Eric.
We did much.
Oh. I'm so sorry! I didn't mean to talk! I thought you were gonna be generic!
Found her, did we? And the black
Radon has a festival.
shimmer within, I see. 'Tis as if it were but yesterday.
So again, Lilith is telling us he was there at the time of the first Firekeeper in Lothric. She had this vision of the dark future, because again, she's a Firekeeper. She's connected to the bonfire, which is connected to flame, which is connected to time. So it is theoretically possible that if she's seeing, and she could see any point in time in the fire's history, just again randomly. And then the idea would be, what happens when you see the history where fire ends? Well, that's what she saw, that very end. And they were like, and now that's why her eyes are now permanently connected. Now they're kind of like a permanent portal to the abyss, right? Because now you've made that connection through time and space, and they've sort of become their own little like magical item. It's in his soul. Oh, okay, we'll look at the soul then. But let's get through the items first, since we're here. Again, notice how Gundyr was. The idea is that Gundyr is, of course, goes to try to become the hero, but then he ends up becoming the Iodex, the Judge of Ash. Basically, he's just kind of made into like almost like a device, almost sort of sealed there. But as we see here, the idea is the weapon has it has like the highest, I think it has some of the highest durability in the game. And the point is, this is supposed to reflect how it doesn't decay, quote unquote. It doesn't like degrade over time or whatever. It can basically last like pretty much forever. And the point being, of course, or at least the closest thing to it. And then the idea is, of course, the description, especially the Japanese version, makes clear. It sort of understands that, infers that, okay, this means that, okay, he was actually, this was all part of a plan. Whoever gave this weapon for him to use for his fire linking ritual was not actually planning for him to actually link the fire. This was intended instead for him to end up becoming the ash and all that, and they were just going to use this as a pretext. So it's like, oh, so he ends up in Untended Graves, so him being late may not have been totally his own fault, which is true. As we see here, the prisoner's chain, which tells us how it used to restrain, in the localization makes clear, of course, the idea of restraining a champion Gundyr, and the hero Gundyr specifically. Of course, we get it from his soul here. The idea, of course, the localization kind of makes it a little weird. The idea that a prisoner is one who stake to everything in a belief and proclaim most apparent in the grace of champions. The point that the Japanese is making is that a prisoner is someone who basically kind of just accepts fate, right? Like, they don't... it's like they sort of just kind of, they don't try to, break their fate or carve their own path or etc. how you do it, right? They just kind of be like, they're just kind of like, they're subject to the whims of the universe, etc., right? And then the idea being is that, especially when you have a destiny, which sort of you're supposed to follow, right? Like, that's your destined route that you're supposed to take, right? And this is true in both the literal sense of the universe sort of does everything in its power to keep you from being able to do anything else, as well as the case of you have a, something sort of plotted out planned for you, like, say, the destiny to become a Lord of Cinder. And the idea of this becomes especially binding, this sort of becomes this huge, that becomes extremely confining, including for a hero. So we have the idea of that, one, Gundyr was bound at some point. Someone restrained him with chains and everything, which, as we can see, he broke free, and we end up finding him in Untended Graves, but it tells us that somebody tried to capture and restrain him and keep him from fulfilling his duty on time. And then he clearly, being a hero, he was strong enough to break free, but he was unfortunate enough that they bought enough time for him to just happen to end up in the wrong dimension. And then get killed by us. So it ended up working out for his, the conspirators against him anyway. And then, the idea being is that Gundyr, being someone who apparently is so bound to the destiny that, okay, sure, there was some foul play involved or whatever, but he ended up falling against us, ended up in that dimension. Again, that was not really entirely his fault. So he's sort of like, well, you know what? I failed to fulfill my duty of the destiny to do so, so I have to now accept my new destiny now of becoming the Judge of Ash, right? And he sort of ends up joining in there, right? So there's this entire idea that everything was, again, planned out to use Gundyr and who he is, his honor-bound character, against him. And as we talked about before, he is a king. And he is a king who looks like old King Duran, of course, who is a reference to, from Boletaria, the founding king of Boletaria, who united his people in a war against wyverns. An obvious reference, of course, to the idea of, oh, a king? And a country where was founded warring against wyverns? Well, darn. Gundyr is most likely the founding king of Lothric. And then, which makes sense, because again, we were going to, in content, encounter him in the temple, where, we were going to encounter him in the temple where the first Firelink Shrine originally was, right? In Consume King Osiros's place. So before we would go to the Firelink Chamber, you would face Gundyr, who had fought many other warriors before, or whatever. And he was going to be a kind of trial for those who would go to Firelink Shrine there. So there's this, again, it's all consistent in the idea that, yeah, that makes sense. If he was from that early period, he could have potentially been a character who became this sort of trial when the original fire-linking temple was still being used. Now, as we can see, that didn't turn out to be the case. Instead, the temple ended up being abandoned because too many people were being buried there from all the fire-linkings, and then they had built a new temple out where the Cemetery of Ash is now. And that new temple is now in ruins, of course. Oh my god. Old one! Go back to your remake! The idea is that the old temple now is, was moved outside, which is likely where Gundyr was heading, hence why we see him there, because he's like, again, imagine he goes outside, through back to Lothric, to this, to end up finding, like us, into a dark version of the Cemetery of Ash, and when he's going through there, he's like, oh, the Lord Vessel thing, which was there, it's not lit or anything. Well, what am I going to do? And he goes back to the entrance chamber over here, and he's like, well, maybe I could try to add some light or do something, or well, I don't know what's going on or whatever, and then he comes across us and we kill him. No way, was Miyazaki a Demon Souls fan? Demon Souls reference again, I'm noticing a pattern, lol. Yes, there's going to be a yeah. Like I said, From Software is a very meta company. They love their references to past games. And they're very good at incorporating them, too. Or, not even references to past games. Sometimes just references to the development history for their own games. Now, here's the point you want to make, right? So, once a champion came late to the festivities and greeted by a shrine without fire and a bell that would not toll. Yeah, the localization is prettying it up. The language is just like, he came late. The point being is that, he was supposed to be a hero who would link the fire. He ended up not being that whatsoever. Now, the idea of Gundyr as the founding king of Lothric makes a lot of sense now, because remember, before we could face Gundyr here in Untended Graves, this is the narrative genius of Dark Souls 3, we had to face Oseros, who establishes how he went crazy, all in the efforts to create what? A Lord of Cinder. This was the royal family's quote-unquote dream. Oseros was so obsessed with the fact that his family had failed, a huge blemish in this country, which worships the fire linking. They're all about the fire linking. As we saw, they will even create sacrificial replica rituals of the fire linking along the high wall, sacrificing prisoners just for the purposes of sort of mimicking the fire linking. All of that is for the purposes of keeping the Age of Fire. The whole imagery about being an angel of God, serving the gods. Oseros' own shield, his own crest. Oh, we don't have it here. About a skyward bird looking up to the heavens, looking up to the gods, looking up to the divine, and trying to reach for his crown up there, where the gods be. He's trying to live up to the his holy calling. But you know what? His family made a mistake, because Gundyr came late. He failed. He ended up being killed, and now he's a judge of Ash. And there's this tale being told of how he messed up. And the citizens love this tale, but Oseros hates it. He hates it. And I have an entire post that goes into him and his psychology for that. But suffice to say, you get an idea of why, how everything sort of came together in Lothric the way it did. Oseros was one of those kings who just couldn't accept how his family has this huge stain on its honor, and he went mad trying to resolve it for the sake of the fire linking. Now, of course, the irony would be who was conspiring against Gundyr who's conspiring against, I should say, Lothric's first king to make him a fire linker, all that. Because let's say that Gundyr was an undead or whatever, right? He just happened to turn undead because he got old, and it was like, okay, I'm dead, but I came back, so I'll be a Lord of Cinder or whatever. Let's just say that happened, right? Because obviously there were tons of fire linkings happening before that, because it ends up being in that temple over there where Gundyr ends up set up instead of the first temple. So that being the case, we can all say, okay, who would benefit from having the King of Lothric, who is so desperate to prove his worth to the gods, end up basically humiliating himself and having to become this huge stain on the family? Well, I could think of one god who is known for doing things in the shadows, as it were, in the dark of the sun, if you will, who might totally be like, hey, you know what, I was in charge of the fire linking originally, but then it got out of my hands, and I can't help that, but you know what, now that I've happened to find it, because it's gotten, the fire's moved a little bit closer, so that way we could have contact. In fact, a certain primordial serpent went on ahead and found and made contact with said people who, you know, the fire just happened to land in their lap, and they just happened to get to it first. But you know what? I've always been in charge in running things here, and you know, in the future, I might have my sister married off to certain rulers of this land and this people in order to have her act as a point guard to look over the cemetery as part of her duties. And I might also be involved in sort of the strange swirling dark vortex on the back of this silver mask that lets these firekeepers be able to see. So yes, I am very much saying that Gwendolyn very likely is responsible for the sabotage for the purposes of making sure that the Lothric royal family is subservient to him and Irithyll. the festival thing was so confusing for so many people when the game launched back in 2016, lol, and in the end it was just a mistake. I'm so surprised that festivities was like such a big deal. Like, I won't say it. No, but yeah, so we could kind of see that, yeah. You kind of see how it's all connecting the dots, right? It also creates this tragic irony where Gwyndolin ironically created Oseros, which ended up dooming Lothric and everything. So it's kind of like, it took a while, but karma came back for Gwyndolin. And this is before, and this is, this is ignoring the fact that he ends up getting, one-upped by a human, and then later eaten by another. Oh, Gwyndolin. Again, I love Dark Souls villains. They're so good. But yeah, we've been here long enough. We've been, like, through Untended Graves and here in Firelink Shrine for already, like, 2.5 hours almost. So, let's move things along. First, we'll do this. Yep, okay. And we will, for our last final note, we will talk about the first Firekeeper. Now, obviously, the first Firekeeper in Lothric had this incident where obviously, they're creating their own system. You got the old Dark Souls 2 Firekeepers, who were apparently buried here. Because obviously, you have the old Firekeepers who are helping out. Don't know what happened to Shanalot. She probably, like, effed off somewhere in the world and is just, like, enjoying her freedom somewhere. She's like, I no longer have to worry about this. I did my job back in the Dark Souls 2's garbage plot. But, the point being, of course, is that, they were likely helping along, but obviously Lothric needs to establish its own line of Firekeepers to keep things going. So it's like, okay, especially with how much they're linking the fire and all that. So it's like, okay, we'll have her do it, da-da-da. Oh no, she's accidentally connected to the future where the first flame actually ends, and now she's permanently connected that way, and anyone could possibly realize that, hey, the world, the Age of Fire ending is inevitable. That is the future. There is no stopping that. We are just delaying the inevitable. But, like, nope, we can't have that. Nope, keep the faith. Have hope that things will stay. Stay as they should be. As a result, they end up blinding all future Firekeepers and giving them these masks as kind of replacement eyes, so that way, again, I point out how it's a dark swirling vortex, and how, of course, as we see with the Dark Moon Talisman, the Dark Moon, of course, is very closely related to the dark in many respects, so it's very natural that they could create swirling vortexes which could simulate a type of light, especially, again, the Dark Moon is, of course, a moon and moonlight, as it's about to be completely consumed by darkness and become a new moon. It's just a sliver of a crescent left. She's probably hanging out with the BOTC still. BOTC. You gotta not do the abbreviations on me. The bed of the no, not bed of chaos. You're gonna have to. I don't know what the hell that's supposed to be. I'm sorry. I'm stupid. Not deserted corpses. I want some souls! But the point is that the Firekeepers, of course, are, also example of the idea that Irithyll and Lothric, of course, made contact after the fact, but still early in their history. Notice how the Dark Moon Pendant uses a Lothric sword in front of the Crescent Moon here. So the idea is, of course, that the Dark Moon and these new, these very old but quote-unquote newer contracts worked out with the Way of Blue and the Blue Sentinels, where they kind of the Dark Moon Knights subcontract the work to the Blue Sentinels, because obviously they're more numerous and their fates kind of divulged after the events of Dark Souls 2. They can help with the Way of Blue when the Dark Moon Knights are very few in number because they're like the Gwyndolin's elite. Anyway, point is that we can see how the Covenants as we know them today are very much based on, again, Lothric and Irithyll coming into contact. And again, silver, Cirrus, silver armor. Again, we see how this is a very consistent theme with Irithyll style. Bearer of the Curse, of course. I see it all capitalized, I just don't think of it that way. I'm just like, BOTC, what is that? Bearer of the Curse, yeah. Well, yeah. Bearer of the Curse probably linked the fire, to be honest, considering how this game considers its canon stuff, so yeah. Anyway, either way, the point is, of course, is that the Firelink Shrine ended up, as we said earlier, Firelink Shrine was probably not Firelink Shrine originally, it was probably just a place where the graves and stuff were being made. It was just a funeral parlor, essentially. And then it only became Firelink Shrine when they ran out of room with all the other two temples, because they kept burying everyone there. And again, this makes sense because if the first Firekeeper was to be buried somewhere, they're going to bury her. Okay, we got to quickly throw her. So she's, let's say they're at the first temple where the first Firekeeper was. And they're like, okay, what do we bury her? Well, out back, we've got the funeral parlor place, right? So we could just like take her here. We could stuff her in this corner here. We'll imagine this was like a formal mausoleum or something. And then they quickly create illusory walls at all the entrances to make sure they're covered. So therefore, we'll hide her. So that way no one can find her and no one will know about it and yada, 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 right? Well, like they'll come up with some cover story for what happened for anyone who might be curious. The idea, of course, being there is that at this time there was no bell tower with the mausoleum because again, Firelink Shrine wasn't like that. There are the bells as we see at the second temple at least, and perhaps at one point even the first. We do, of course, see a giant tower jutting out of the ruins, which that might have been their bell tower at the time. It's hard to say. So all of that's being said to kind of make the point of, again, the history of Lothric works out pretty fine, honestly, when you consider all the stuff Untended Graves is trying to squeeze in lore-wise. And in the narrative order that does. But, alrighty, we're moving on. If you have any more questions about that, I'll answer them as we go, but I think I'm done covering it. I want to get to Grand Archives, because I don't want to be a liar. Where is... There we go. Now again, we established how we could not get into the archives. Those doors were shut tight, and apparently my pyromancer with flame that can melt even rock isn't interested in opening it with my my fire. Again, gameplay versus lore. Instead, we see that Gotthard, who, as we established, went out, left the castle for the purposes of finding Sullivan, who sent the Outrider Knights. He's like, no, 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 I do not like what this forebodes for my country. So again, Gotthard proves to be a patriotic man, as he was a knight, and that carried on into his work as one of the assassins, the Black Hand, the elite of the king's work. This is someone, keep in mind, to be a Black Hand, you have to not only become a hunter, quote-unquote, the unofficial fourth pillar, whose job, unfortunately the localization doesn't translate this, their job is to, quote-unquote, challenge the other pillars, to essentially be sort of the king's way to regulate the other pillars, so they don't use him, he uses them. If any of the pillars act out of line anyway, he can always send a hunter to kill them. And the elite of these hunters, the creme de la creme, are the Black Hand, for they are hunters who've not only survived... who are not only strong enough to survive multiple generations of kings, but they are willing to serve multiple generations of kings. Their loyalty isn't to one individual ruler, they are to the institution of the royal family, of the Lothric state. So again, it makes sense that a knight might end up becoming one of these assassins. Let's say he turned undead or whatever, but he was really skilled, he had unique swords and all that. And so they're like, well, you know, you can end up becoming a hunter, a sort of a secret agent or whatever, and being undead, you'll survive the generations, but you'll, as a patriot, you'll serve any generation of kings. You aren't going to sort of, you won't become a political liability for the future of Lothric because, like, you know, you'll kill all the heirs or whatever because you want to save your king or whatever. You're going to let the politics play out as they will. Gotthard, as we can see here, leaves his sword and a key to the Grand Archives. Again, makes sense. If he's an assassin, he's probably has keys to all of Lothric, so he can't be locked out anywhere. You know, just slip in, stab a scholar, then slip out, right? Important detail to note, Gotthard actually blinks, as you can see here. He is not, quote-unquote, dead. They just pose his, quote-unquote, living model here. I don't know why they couldn't bother. Also, you may notice he doesn't have his swords equipped. He has Kamui's swords equipped. Because, as you may or may not know, Gotthard has the same model as Kamui. Now, Kamui is an Eastern name, specifically Ainu, but obviously still gives us the idea of the Far East being not Japan. And the point, of course, being... is that... they apparently didn't want to create a new Eastern model in the armor, so they just copied Gotthard's model, his very Western-style face, and just swapped out the weapons. Because who really looks closely at the enemy NPCs you face, really? So, yeah. That happened. Alright, we're good. We talked previously, of course, about all the propaganda here to give the impress the idea that Lothric scholars should act loyal, be good little servants of the gods. Do not forget their position, despite the fact that they are researchers who are just, of course, studying knowledge, and knowledge can be dangerous because it can include heresy. Again, recall what I said earlier with the daughter of Crystal, Crimhilled, and the Red Eye Orb that she presumably acquired from the Grand Archives after they dealt with the party of Dark Wraiths, one of whom they imprisoned. Now, as we can see here, some overgrowth happening quite a bit. They shut their doors when the Pus of Man showed up, so this tells us that when Prince Lothric over there was like, nah, I'm not linking the fire, and basically let presumably the Eclipse and all the Pus of Man to start going crazy because the fire hit imminent breaking point as the Age of Dark was approaching. What ended up going on was that, okay, we're just gonna shut the doors and pretend nothing's happening. We're gonna deal with our own problems. Well, things clearly didn't work out because we find that there's a whole lot of scholars who are hollows here. And we're going to see our other Crystal Sage friend. Now, this one uses blue magic instead of purple like the one in Faron, as we established before. This is because the one in Faron seems to have been studying the deep of the cathedral, hence why it had that more purplish glow. We see something similar with Sullivan, where, again, his sorcery is getting extremely close to the dark, like dangerously so, so therefore it's having a similar effect. Though, again, as far as game mechanics are concerned, it's still considered sorcery. Well, whatever. I didn't like you anyway. Oh my god, you annoying little... Let's get him to move. Or her, I should say. Yeah. The first Crystal Sage is bald. This one is, has long hair, which potentially hints that the first one is male and the second one is female, as twins. I will assume that going forward for the sake of simplicity. We can also see here how, we can see here how the Lothric slaves here have weapons that are on fire. You might think that that would be a fire hazard to the books. I would agree. But they actually have reason to use that here. Aside from, of course, the idea of maybe pus. Titanite chunk. Oh my. Notice again, High Priestess, King. Scholars. Looks like a tree. That'll be relevant for later. Framped as an angel. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about this area because, again, you get the idea. Books, libraries, tables, desks, study, all that. Like, there's nothing really to say there. We do, of course, see something similar to Duke's Archives where there's a bunch of devices and stuff. There's a staircase here, but it's collapsed and broken. Da-da-da-da-da. For gameplay reasons, obviously, but of course it makes sense in lore because, again, stuff gets broken when civil wars and conflicts and shit happen. So, yeah, whatever. Moving right along, Soul of Crestfallen Knight. We can see how knights have been killed here. Well, this is interesting, because the only knights that should be here are Lothric knights. And what are Lothric knights getting killed here? Well, Lothric knights are, of course, at least supposed to be closely related to the High Priestesses, loyal to the gods and all that. Huh. I wonder, was there a war between the heretics involved with the Crystal Sage and the faithful? Because of what happened with Osros, because keep in mind, it was the Crystal Sage's heresy for Seath that they led to Osros going cuckoo, which led to him not being around and allowing this civil war to spiral out of control. You can easily imagine people starting to point fingers when the Pus of Man is banging outside the door. We normally would see a scholar walk by here, but of course I decided not to look. Oh, actually hit. That'll be for later. That'll be for later. As we can see here, a lot of fire is being used to keep this wax melted. Now, wax as a medium being affected by fire, you could imagine it having some properties from that fire. So the idea that this could be used to ward off certain types of evil spirits isn't that unusual. However, in this case, the fire power infused in this wax seems to not be used for against dark magic per se, but against certain sorcery that just so happens to turn you to stone and petrifies you. As we established earlier, when dark enemies petrify, it's because of the life-eating power of the dark. They basically suck you dry of all your souls, so there's nothing left but the primordial stone element. But in the case of other types of magic, which are shown, is of course just turning to stone. Now, who evolved with sorcery would want to turn stuff to stone? Well, we know a certain petrifying friendly entity. Notice here how Lothric Knights don't use Blessed Weapon like they do in Outside in relation to the areas associated with the High Priestess in the Church. Instead, they adopted the heretical crystal sorcery of the Crystal Sages and Seath. Again, giving us the indication that perhaps the knights who are dead aren't these heretics, but those who remain faithful. Those who weren't swayed by the heresy, they were just here doing their job on guard duty. And now that everything's in chaos, they start pointing fingers, deciding who's to blame, and things spiral out of control from there. We find in this little cubby the crystal chime. This is Gertrude's chime. It's a foreshadowing that she is up there. Oh, which we can't see. I'll have to leave, Loki. I'll finish watching the live later. That's okay, Eric. That's okay. Like I said, I'm gonna probably finish this as quick as I can. Or if not, at least get through like a decent chunk of this, and then we'll continue later. Because we are obviously going at 2.5 hours, and I want to sleep as much as the rest of you. Ooh, there we go. At least we can kill these guys easy. I like that. Notice also the front cloth they have. It's the same as what Emma wears as a High Priestess. Again, giving the idea of holiness that these characters are supposed to keep. Again, some of them lighting fire as like wicks. They have these candlestick blades, which they use to not only light flames and keep those lit, but also use them as not just sorcery catalysts, but also to go stabby to regulate themselves in case any get a little too close to heresy. All this is to promote that they are being given the privilege to read the world's knowledge, to learn all there is to know about this universe, including the darker heretical aspects potentially. Because again, knowledge is power, and you want to know stuff even if it's dangerous to know, because hey, it might help you on how to counter it, right? That's the entire premise behind Velka in Orlando. We're all about sunlight and stuff, but Velka, she knows dark magic. Well, that's okay. She could be a resident dark expert. She knows all magic, right? So it's not like she specifically is serving the dark. She wouldn't ever betray her people for any reason whatsoever, especially if it has to do with something Gwyn might have done. Now, this is what we use the wax for in order to not deal with these petrifying hands. Now, we get a Chaos Gem from here as well as Twinkling Titanite. Twinkling, of course, related to Seath and Seath's research and stuff, so again, it's very generic for crystal lizards, but also found in areas highly associated with sorcery and sometimes Seath. But, also, we get, of course, the notion that there is something chaos-related here in order for this lizard to have gotten that, and we will see that shortly. Now, the hands here are repurposed from what I talked about in the last stream, the cut slug massive hollows enemy. That they would just be a bunch of hollows inside a slug form. These hands were copy-pasted here, so they're missing a finger, but they do resemble Seath's hands. And of course, it makes sense as we learn with all that why the Crystal Sages come here. Well, so Seath's research from the Grand Archive, from the Duke's Archives would be here, because again, Duke's Archives, at least parts of it, went to Drain Lake, and it makes sense that some of those other parts the same parts might have ended up in Lothric, where they could have then been collected as knowledge here, along with other stuff related to Dark Souls 2 setting. The hands, being the wrathful spirit of Seath, some of his soul ended up in the books, of course, because again, Seath had a lot of research he committed to writing and work, so some of his soul might end up, rubbing off on them. And that soul, of course, is so desperate to have his stone scales of immortality that we can see how much like his crystal breath, they have this mineralizing effect here. Because again, crystallization is just another form of mineralization. It's all connected. Where's our lever? I could have swore there's a lever around here. Here it is. Now we come here. we open up this hidden library bookshelf, and we find this. Well, this is curious. This is not like any other place we see in the game. We see lots of pots, again, indication of activity, supplies moving, things of that nature. Bundles of wood, we'll use those for building or burning. Lots of bones of both humans and bovine. We have this chest here, which has the witch's locks. Now this is the cut black hair of a witch of Izalith, which has been made into a whip. Well, this ain't Izalith, so what is this doing here? Well, as we can see, it even has the chaos power of the witch infused. Well, there's only one chaos witch who is left alive up until relatively recently, who had black hair, because the fair lady, of course, had white hair from her illness, turned white. And that would be Quelana. So again, we know what happened to Quelana. We already established with the Master earlier the idea of the Chaos Blade using potentially Quelana's soul in order to create because again, the fair lady, of course, became a fire keeper, so there may be some unique mitigating factors there. But anyway, point is that very likely took Quelana's soul, turned it into the Chaos Blade, and very likely took the Witch's Lock. Ended up scalping her and using her hair, bringing her hair to the Grand Archives. In fact, it's very likely that one of the reasons that Lothric went to war, because the pillar of the scholars said, yeah, sure, just, bring back those, like, witches. We want to study them and their power and all that. And it's like, okay, scalp away. Took their power. Now, we have this idea, of course, that we've seen this already with the chime. How Gertrude essentially, her chime was essentially confiscated when she was imprisoned in the archives, and both her holy bell and presumably her were being quote-unquote defiled, being studied essentially and used. And we can see how the heresy of the archives have corrupted this holy chime. Now, back to the scene at hand. Quelana's dead, and sorcerers came. Quelana's dead, and the sorcerers of the archives basically are behind it. And while they receive the locks from the soldiers in the war, such as our war master. We may notice here there are two bowls, each side by side with a candlestick, as if these are supposed to be vessels of the flame here. We also, of course, have all the bones, giving the idea that someone would try to burn the bodies. This is reinforced by, oops, sorry, candlestick. Look at all the ash and wood all piled up here, especially the burn stuff, as we can see, all around. And then we have this body at the back surrounding, where it's all surrounding. Someone with power within. And we get this idea, a sorcerer was trying his hand at pyromancy, and he was trying to study it, maybe even trying to learn flame sorcery. So he was studying Quelana's hair, getting that firepower, studying, and he might even try to get a pyromancy flame out of it, because again, it's her actual hair, and the pyromancy flames are, of course, within the body, so it's quite possible at least like an ember or something was in there. Anyway, the point is that he tried his hand at pyromancy, and he was doing this in secret in his little chamber, doing some not so ethical research, evidently. And as a result, we can see what happened. Power within, of course, drains your life force. It eats away at your soul in exchange for fueling your power, so you become even stronger. So you essentially burn yourself away. Well, our scholar here burned out. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy. Now let's get another douse of wax. We shall now head up a little higher. I think we're gonna... I don't know if we'll get to Crimhilled for this stream, but... maybe if we rush it. Oh. Titanite scale. Again, the idea that they might be studying crystal lizards by having them consume souls and start producing these scales before killing them off before they become giant monstrosities. So again, more research. Oh. Now, obviously, this wax makes us more more vulnerable to fire. But again, it also explains why fire is being used by these slaves and stuff, because again, how do you resist petrification besides using this wax infused with fire? Firepower, of course, counteracts it, because again, flame, the disparity of that the souls that come from the flame, and of course that fuel the flame at the same time. Again, Abyssal Archive will talk how that works in Cosmology. All of it sort of plays together, it sort of like comes together to help resist the petrification, the turning to mineral, right? Because again, more fire, more disparity, less mineral monotony. Gonna make that easy for me. Another twinkling. We're gonna kick this down. Let's also open this. This should open a bookshelf somewhere, right? Yeah, it'll lower that so we can go there. Oh, I forgot. Let's go this way first, because this boy's gonna be a bigger problem. We don't want to go here. No. Oh boy. He's just napping. Studying pyromancies is tiring. Yeah, he's fine. There's no death in Dark Souls. No one dies in Dark Souls. What do you think this is? A mature game for mature audiences? No, this is clearly a kid's game. Nobody dies. They're just sleeping. We don't need to descend right now. But anyway, the point is, you can imagine that the slaves are using these fire weapons to help with either melting the wax or even directly fending off the evil spirits of Seath. It also explains, of course, where Oseros got and Sullivan got the soul of Seath required to perform Draconification, because again, as we established with the Archdragon in Archdragon Peak, that is accomplished by essentially her soul permeating into others within the area, and the meditation helps that along by you, since she can't will it into you, you will it into her with, you will it into yourself out of her with, through the power of meditation. We'll talk about that in the next stream, I think. We'll deal with our sage boy here. Or sage girl, I should say. Keep making that mistake. Oh no, I don't want to descend. I thought there was a kick. Also, they made a mistake with this ladder here. We'll talk about that in a sec. Now, you may notice, where are you? There we go. Let's see if we can get a sword to come out. Sword. If you may notice, this isn't the crystal rapier the person uses. This sage uses a normal S-stock. As we see, Crimhilled actually uses the crystal rapier, so we could get the idea that she had received a gift from this sage in the form of the sage's own rapier. Presumably the male sage is the one who also helped along with giving his own gift, and they kind of just gave them both collectively to her, that being the staff she uses, which is essentially one of their crystal balls lodged into a tree wood. There we go, crystal scroll obtained. We will now head down. Ooh, there is something here, so we'll go this way. There we go. I don't really care about the specifics. Oh. They get sent to the Shadow Realm. That would be hilarious. I mean, we could always say instead of the Shadow Realm, they get sent to the Untended Graves. It would make just as much sense. They all get sent to the Abyss, the Shadow Realm. Hey, eventually all souls will end up in the Abyss when the Age of Dark arrives, right? So it's not wrong. fall down there from up top side. Oh, we also need to get to the next wax bath before bad stuff happen. Can I survive this? Yeah. Yep. Now, of course, in typical reference to the Grand Archives, we get Avalon, much like in Dark Souls 1. Again, another thing which might be studied for its mechanism, if not its magical knowledge. Yeah, there we go. Same thing otherwise. Again, it's a cheeky reference, but it helps build on the type of characters the scholars are. We haven't opened the shortcut here yet, so we'll go this way. Actually, no, because we have the ladder, we can just go up. Yeah, we can just do this. I saw Grey Rat from the window. I gotta get Grey Rat's ashes. Don't worry, I will. I'll pick them up. I promise. We will get our little rat. Before I forget. Homeward Bone. Dude's like, I want to go home. Well, don't worry, dude. I killed the Crystal Sage. You can leave now. Again, I love the cheeky... You gotta love Dark Souls that, even some of its world building and lore is done for a good joke. So we go this way, and then we'll go this way. No, but the thing is downstairs. Ugh. You know what? We will deal with our friend here first, because it's actually going to be relevant to what we're going to see in the future. Notice how this clearly is supposed to be an entrance, but it's got a very obvious illusionary wall. This tells us that this isn't trying to hide something, as it would be very obvious that it wasn't hiding anything with this gate here. Instead, it's trying to keep something in. That thing being, of course, an Outrider Knight. So an Outrider Knight got in here. As we can see, this part of the archives is more damaged than any other, so you can imagine that this mad knight turning into a dog is oversized dog is going wild in frenzy, right? Because he doesn't know what to do because he's trapped in this this chamber. Also, again, recall when we were seeing Orbeck, we saw this box here with some scrolls and stuff, but it was covered in moss. Same box here, because again, the idea being that the Crystal Sage, the male one, went when he went to Faron, brought some of his work with him. Anyway, the Outrider Knight, of course, much like in the other parts, they have been brought here. There's the Petrification Curse. But the problem, of course, is that this knight is too crazy and rattled to be to not get fooled by basic sorcery. So he's like, how did I get in? Where's the exit? Rah, 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 rah. And, well, we saw the result. Just ends up going wild inside here. Again, sorcerers were able to lead him in here, and everything worked out fine. Now, I can't heal, so smile. Oh, I still have the Velka ring. That might be worth keeping because of what we... Oh! That is exactly why it's worth keeping. Woo! Get the Outrider armor. Again, arbitrary acquiring of armor set, because again, we killed plenty of Outrider Knights, but this isn't Skyrim, so we can't just loot whatever we want off of whatever's being worn. Gotta add those arbitrary gameplay restrictions. Now, apparently this corpse isn't dead, he's just sleeping. I wonder how long it took for him to give up and just sulk in the corner. Oh. You never know with that knight. Was like, I'm going crazy. How do I get out? I don't remember how I got in. I'm just nuts. Mwah. Clearly the knight didn't think of jumping down here because, unfortunately, despite how it looks, apparently this was a dead end to it. Which, hey, if I jump down here, I die, so I'm totally okay with this. I consider this consistency. If only stay consistent with some of the other enemies. Anyway, we got our sleepy boy here. A scholar, as evidenced by the wax. Reading a book in his chair. To be fair, I might be busy too, considering what was over there. Now, if I recall correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, this is the same audio file that plays when you put a mimic to sleep with a Lloyd talisman. I may be wrong, though, so again, I think this is the same thing, though. So I don't know if this is just a joke, or if it's seriously, they really are just asleep. And they fell asleep reading. Because, you know, big words. Either way, it stops when we loot the item. So again, maybe it's just a joke. The item is what's more important. Where I don't see... Oh, there it is. It's in the corner. Soul Stream. Now, I would translate this more as like Soul Torrent. But again, this was translated in Dark Souls 2 as Soul Geyser. So again, despite the different names in the English, these are in fact supposed to be the same sorcery. Now, of course, they don't function exactly the same. In Dark Souls 2, the sorcery was, of course, associated with Aldia. And the idea being is that, again, the Japanese for Dark Souls 2 is more accurate, saying that this was Aldia's legacy. It was the thing he left behind when he became Giant Burning Tree Man. He left it behind in his manor, of course, among all the other stuff that him and his acolytes were researching and invented. The point being, of course, is that it is a sorcery that is very close to the dark, similar to Homing Soul Mass with Logan, in that it pursues the target until like it wears them down and their defenses and all that, and strikes, right? So the idea, again, this pursuing nature, which we see, of course, with the dark. Because, again, dark likes other life because it wants to eat it. So, again, there's this idea of the dark automatically going after other things. We see this, of course, with the pursuers, or as later games would translate it, the affinity miracles. Sorcery / hex. Now, of course, the idea is, well, this isn't like the Aldia spell at all, right? It just does the souls, but it's removed all the dark elements here. Very curious indeed, considering that these sorcerers have a huge culture, because they're in a holy kingdom of Lothric, trying to, you know, not be misjudged as heretics who like practicing dark magic and are a threat to the holy order of the gods. Well, you might see that someone might censor their work by having the sorcery remove those problematic elements, so that way they could disseminate the knowledge without repercussions. Well, very curious that this would happen to Aldia's spell, considering that there is this first of the scholars who doubted the linking of the fire and was alleged to be the private mentor to the royal prince. Now, the actual statement here is that he wasn't his private mentor, he just taught him in secret. So the idea being is, it isn't like, oh yeah, you know, we're just gonna give you a private tutor, right? No. This isn't like, oh, this was all formally done. This first scholar went behind everyone's backs to secretly teach the prince something antithetical to their culture, to Lothric culture. So obviously no one in Lothric is going to approve of this if they are a God-fearing man like the king or the high priestess or the knights or any of that. So this was all off the book. Now, this begs a question, a very important question. What's the scholar teaching the prince as we figure out Prince Lothric, who, of course, seems to have taken those teachings of doubting linking the fire to heart, thinking, you know what, I'm not going to link the first flame. I'm just going to let it die. Slowly and gradually. Well, I'm going to hurt myself if I'm not careful, so we're going to use this. Well, as we will... As we later learn, Lothric not only took so well to the teachings that the first scholar presented, but the first scholar also is alive during this era. Well, how is that possible? After all, if Lothric is a human nation, no undead or anything like that. Everyone who's undead now is undead because of the civil fighting that's happening here, and it's causing them to die, and some turn undead, and then they obviously hollow. The nature of things. So what's going on that everyone is turning into, well, that this scholar, the first of his kind, the first one to basically start the Grand Archives, is someone who apparently owns this sorcery of Aldia, and has been alive more than most could for a human lifespan. Instead of dying after, say, 100 years, he's still alive all these generations of kings later, after Gundyr all the way to Osseros. Well, we know of a certain sorcerer, a scholar, if you will, though again, the terms are different. Aldia is referred to as a researcher of the first sin, or the original sin, whereas these scholars are referred to as the wise men, much like Freck and Logan in past games and stuff. But anyway, I digress. Shriving Stone. We'll have to keep that in mind for out here. The point being is that Aldia is someone, of course, who proves to have been able to survive much longer than humans because he lost his humanity and turned into giant burning tree thing. And as a giant burning tree thing, he would be able to look not so different. There's the High Priestess statues overlooking all the scholars and stuff, because again, propaganda. Yes, we'll come down here because we need to bring everything back. Okay. And we shall open the back here. Perfect. We will now come over here. Anyway, the point being is that we can imagine Aldia not... Oh! Go away. Where's your brother? There you are. Don't have time to deal with you. Trying to explain. We can imagine him looking quite like this. And this image of a scholar, almost melted like candle wax, and yet suspiciously looking almost tree-like. Maybe trying to depict the first scholar. In which case, I'm basically insinuating that Aldia is the first scholar, who, of course, had special teachings to the bearer of the curse in Dark Souls 2, because Aldia also wasn't a big fan of the fire linking. He didn't like this whole linking the fire, but he didn't like the Age of Dark either, because he understood that the Age of Dark was the truth, that all mankind is supposed to, let's actually go back to our waifu. Because Aldia understood that the linking the fire was a scam by Gwyn and the gods. It was all done to trick and fool us and manipulate us into becoming good slaves, in the colloquial sense. And Aldia didn't like that. He didn't like being lied to and manipulated, and for all mankind to also have been lied to and manipulated. There we go, perfect. But Aldia also had a problem. He really liked the Age of Fire. You know, he liked all the perks that come with being a slave to the gods. He liked that warm sun. He liked those crops of field. He liked all that warm and loving morality that came with it. Like, all of that, you know, that's nice, right? Like, it's okay. Like, the dark is stark and scary and cold, and, you know, it's so different from the world that I've always known. So, Aldia ended up being a bit of a fence sitter. He couldn't commit to the Age of Fire, but he wouldn't go forward with the Age of Dark. And what do you know? The entire premise of Dark Souls 3 is that Prince Lothric, who this first scholar taught, this mysterious, immortal first scholar with Aldia's sorcery, which was supposed to be just something left behind in Aldia's manor, at least the text, and is strangely censored to accommodate Lothric's sensibilities. How strange that Prince Lothric ends up creating a scenario where the fire linking isn't happening, but neither is the Age of Dark being pursued, or whatever closest equivalent to it. Almost as if... There we go. No, yeah, we still gotta go inside. Almost as if all of this was per Aldia's design, as if Aldia was finally getting what he wanted. And well, what do you know? What is the result of Aldia getting what he wanted? Of creating this anarchy where it's neither Age of Fire or Age of Dark. We just sort of stick to the Twilight. Let things play out as they will. See what may come. Well, we see what comes. And it's Aldrich. Someone inevitably is going to fill the vacuum that you leave in the wake of anarchy. This is why anarchy has never really worked as a coherent political ideology, because when someone no longer commits to anarchy, everything falls apart. And if people come together in order to stop people who are trying to stop the anarchy, well, now you're suddenly organizing to form what resembles a state. So, again, we essentially are in a situation, you're essentially in a lose-lose situation. So, Aldia wants to kind of create this thing where there won't be an Age of Fire or Age of Dark, at least for a while, because obviously eventually the fire will, of course, fade out, slowly but surely. And as a result, we see other people who are like, you know, it kind of sucks that the Age of Fire is no longer happening, the system's kind of going around, and all is sort of collapsing into chaos. We gotta restore order, and you know what, it should be my order, right? Because if I was the person in charge, I would create utopia. I would make the perfect world, because it mirrors my sensibilities, and obviously, I'm the standard for what is so great and wonderful and awesome. No, none need else comment. So, the idea, of course, being then that they're, of course, going to fill the vacuum. And those people, as we see, are people like Aldrich. So, be careful. Be careful when you're a fence sitter. Your refusal to commit to a side and make the hard decisions will mean that other people will do that for you. And you will probably not want those people doing that for you, because they will not be the people that deserve to be in control of the world, that's for sure. Even if you don't think you are. There's more of the pilgrims. We see how they're all rising out. Up here. No, that's already covered, so we're good. We can go here now. We didn't get back here, though. I'll have to remember that next time. So it was Aldia that made Dark Souls 3, not Miyazaki. Yes, exactly. Basically, Miyazaki saw Dark Souls 2, Scholar of the First Sin, and was like, saw what Aldia's whole ending was about, and was like, that's stupid. I'm going to make an entire game deconstructing why that is stupid. And thus became the entire events of Dark Souls 2. I mean, Dark Souls 3. But yes, it is that is likely the reason why Dark Souls 3 has the premise that it does. It's very convenient how Dark Souls 3's premise is the perfect response. Dark Souls 3 as a game, I should say, is the perfect response to how Dark Souls 2 Scholar sort of rounds things out with Aldia's dumbass solution of, hey, just do nothing, bro. Let's see what happens. Just leave things as they are. What could possibly go wrong? This is why I affectionately refer to Aldia as the smartest idiot in the series. More knights. Lots of knights dying. Unfortunately, our wax bath is up there. Isn't there something up here on the stalls or whatever? I guess not. More Titanite scales. Again, they're studying. Alright, we're hitting the 3-hour mark, so I'm going to... Oh. Find Jim. Ooh, boy. I could use a petrifying moss right now. Elden Ring? Please tell me you have that? Oh, boy. Fleshbite ring, the irony. Oh. Okay. And with that, I think we're going to call it to a close. I think this is a good stopping point. I didn't get to Crimhilled like I wanted today to round out with our Untended Graves talk, but you guys ended up asking lots of really good questions that required really lengthy explanations in order to answer properly. I hope I is satisfied on that front. I'm very grateful for you guys tuning in and helping me get through this live stream. It's been a lot of fun. I didn't expect to go here an extra hour, but again, you guys made it worthwhile. We're gonna get my souls back next stream and have some fun. Wait. Oh, right, because I got petrified. Right. That's why I was like, wait a second, the Ring of Sacrifice didn't work. Okay, I got petrified. That's exactly why. Okay, we'll switch this out then, because I think I won't die. It's only 26k souls. I'm not going to mind that much. Here. Okay, yeah. Alrighty, yeah. So, yeah, bye, everybody. It was great to see y'all tuning in. Bye. Have fun.